You sure you have all the rules memorized? My boss said as he gathered his belongings to go home. Yeah, sure thing. I got them all up here, I said as I pointed to my head. He gave me a nod and he headed out the door of the small office to go home. My boss was a little off to say the least. This was my first month as a security guard at a cemetery right around the corner from my residence, and I had just gotten out of college about 3 months ago. The last month of shifts had been boring, sitting around, checking cameras, and doing rounds through the cemetery making sure nothing was out of order. Exciting, right? I needed a source of income, and this was the best paying job that I could find. No real experience needed, the flyer said. My take was that they were desperate to find someone fast, so I took advantage of that. I was hired the day that I found the flyer over the phone. I never even found out the guy's name. Once I came in on my first day, my boss gave me no training, no do's and don'ts. Just a verbal list of 10 rules that I had to follow and memorize before Halloween night. These rules are to be followed only on Halloween night, he said. You must follow these rules to the exact way they are told to you. If you mess up even a small part, well, you won't mess up, because I trust you to follow them word for word. I looked at him, confused because this sounded almost like a threat. Nevertheless, I pulled out my phone and started an audio recording so he could record the list. Once he had finished telling me the rules, I was in absolute disbelief. This guy is insane. No wonder why nobody wants to work here. This guy is actually insane, I thought to myself. I know every place has certain rules to follow, but to designate a set of rules, insane rules for Halloween night only, I guess you won't know how I felt until I tell you the rules that he gave me, word for word, exactly how he told me straight from the recording. Rule number 1. On Halloween night, please arrive at 8:30 p.m. No earlier, no later. Do not walk in these doors until it reaches 8:30. For the love of God, please. Rule number 2. Stay inside the office until 9:15. Do not leave, keep yourself occupied, but do not check these security cameras during this time. I'll make sure to turn them off before you get there, so there is no temptation to peek at them. This might be one of the most important rules. If the monitor turns on by itself, do not look either. If for some reason you do look, and you see it has revealed the A section of the cemetery, you must turn off the lights of the office and hide. If it reveals the B or C section and you look at it, your only option is to run. Good luck with this. To make this easier, just cover the monitor with a jacket or a blanket, because you will not want to see what happens out there this time on Halloween night. Rule number 3. After 9:15 strikes, you will have 30 seconds to get out of the office. Leave the door unlocked. It is possible that you will pass an unnaturally tall figure with no facial features. This is not a Halloween costume, and you must tell him good evening and look him right where his eyes would be. If he doesn't respond, continue on your way to patrol the cemetery. If he says anything at all, you must stand completely still. Do not move a muscle. He might walk around you, but if you keep still until he's done, he should walk away with no problem. Go into the office and slam the door behind him. Rule number 4. You will make your way to Section A. Once you inspect Section A, you will realize the gravestone titled, James R. Hackney is being dug up completely. This is not out of the ordinary. Do not, and I mean do not pay any attention to what is inside the 6-foot hole in the ground. You will not see the rest of your shift if you look down in that hole. Just keep walking to Section B and do not look back. Rule number 5. As soon as you cross the bridge from Section A to B, you will notice about a dozen shadow-like figures standing around in a circle around the big oak tree to the left of the bridge. Please listen closely to what I'm about to say. You must find the figure wearing the black top hat. You will walk up behind him and ask, "Am I clear?" If you hear a voice from inside your head say, "Continue," then you carry on to section B. If you don't hear anything, you must wait. You can look over to this section at this time, but I recommend keeping your eyes down. Trust me. There will be no physical harm to you if you look, but I can't promise you will be emotionally intact after looking. Rule number 6. Once you get the go-ahead, continue on to section B. You may walk around and do what you would normally do every night here. The only catch is you must stay in this section until 10 p.m. It should be 9:30 to 9:45 by now, so you won't have to wait too long. After the time crosses 10, continue on. Rule number 7. After walking out of section B, you will notice a strange temperature change and lighting change. The time will have jumped to 2 a.m. after crossing. Do not panic and please do not answer your phone. Your phone will be ringing constantly. As soon as it starts ringing, you will stand still and not move until it stops. It will be calls from your mother, father, siblings, girlfriend, boyfriend, anyone you can think of. You must not answer these calls. It is not actually them calling. It is in fact the man that you saw earlier, the one with no facial features. He is trying to lure you back to the office. You must stay away from that office until I tell you to go back. Your phone will stop ringing after about a half hour, which leaves you at around 2:30 a.m. You can continue on at this point. Rule number 8. You will notice another time jump. This one, 2 more hours from 2:30 to 4:30. If the time still stays at 2:30 after the call stops, you're in trouble. Unfortunately, there is nothing you can do here. You messed up at a step at some point if you end up here. You can finally finish your inspection of Section C. You must be prepared for a woman covered in blood to run up to you begging for help. She will be asking you where her baby is and if you can come fast to help her. Do not be startled, no matter how loud she yells. Tell her you will meet her outside the cemetery in 10 minutes, for her to wait there. She will run off in the opposite direction, and that's how you know you succeeded. There will be a lot of towels and rags all over the ground covered in blood around Section C. This is the only maintenance you'll have to do. Just pick them up and dispose of them in the waste bin closest to you. Rule number 9. After completing this final task, you must run back to your office. Do not look anywhere but ahead of you. You will see figures everywhere. You will hear your name being called from voices that you think you recognize, but just keep running. Once you reach the office, you will see the faceless man leaving the office building. It should be 5 a.m. at this point. He will stop you and either say, "Good work," and nod at you, and you will slowly walk into the office and close the door. For the remainder of the shift, you can check the camera, sit down, and go on with your shift until I come inside to start mine. Or he would say, "Come with me." If he says, "Come with me," you will run and lock yourself in the office. Do not fall for his calm, monotone voice. He is anything but calm if you mess up. Do not let him in, and wait for him to stop banging on the door. Once the banging stops, cover your eyes for the last hour of your shift. Don't look around until you hear 3 knocks on the door. This will be me to relieve you of your shift. You won't be called in for a few weeks to come to terms with what you have seen, and you will be paid a handsome amount of money for your duties. Now that you have listened to the rules as well, I hope you can understand my initial suspicion and why I was so baffled. I thought this was a joke until I finished my shift. After my boss left at 9:30, I decided I was going to just follow the rules given to me, to humble him and be a good sport of the prank. I didn't check the cameras and I headed out the door. After going outside, the brisk fall air hit me as I saw a tall man walking up to me. I looked at him and he was actually faceless. It looked so real it kind of gave me the creeps. I almost forgot to tell him, "Good evening." He looked at me, well, I think he did, and continued on through the door. I shivered a little as I headed on straight to Section A. I arrived at the entrance and I searched for James R. Hackney's grave, a grave that I always saw, as it was the biggest one there. To my disbelief, it was actually being dug up. I felt sick to my stomach that they would go this far to scare me, so I hurried past the grave as a wave of uneasiness came over me. This can't be real, I reassured myself as I headed across the bridge to Section B. I scanned for the oak tree, and when I finally found out, I noticed the figures my boss warned me about. I instantly spotted the one with the top hat. I unsteadily scurried over to him and asked him, "Am I clear?" No answer. As I stood there, waiting for an answer that never came, I decided to look away from the man and peek over to Section B, because surely the pranksters wanted me to look, since they had warned me against it. I froze and felt pins and needles in my hands as I saw myself standing there in the distance. At least what looked like me, except I was taller and covered in blood. As the figure that presumably was me stared back, it let out a screech and started running towards me. I was startled and absolutely mortified by this, and I turned around to run. I looked back, and as it reached its arms out, it completely vanished. As soon as it had vanished, I heard a voice from within my head say, "Continue." At this point, I had a million thoughts running through my head as I started to realize whatever was happening was somehow impossibly real, and I felt my mind switch from confused to defensive. I inspected the area until 10 p.m., constantly looking over my shoulder. I checked my phone and saw it was time to move to Section 3. I felt exactly what I was told, a temperature change, and saw the surroundings get just a little bit darker. It was noticeably colder. No way, I told myself as I reached for my phone, which displayed 2 a.m. Before I could form another thought, my phone rang red on cue and stopped dead in my tracks. Dad. The phone displayed. I stared back at my phone as I looked at those 3 letters. I never knew my dad, and I definitely never had saved him in my phone. I felt a tear form in my eye because this was a very sensitive topic to me. I let it ring as I got lost in a trance of thinking about how on earth any of this was even possible. The ringing finally stopped and I let out a sigh of relief. I remembered the next rule about the time and I opened my phone again. 2:30. I kept moving on and with some stray tears in my eyes, watched my phone turn from 2:30 to 4:30. This was a relief to me because now that I knew this was somehow real, I realized that I had done all the steps right to this so far. As I started inspecting Section 3 with cold fingers and numb toes, I heard screaming. Naturally, this scared the heck out of me, and I jumped out of my shoes. I snapped my head around to a blood-covered woman screaming, "My baby! I can't find my baby!" I told her after a bit of hesitation that I would meet her at the entrance of the cemetery in 10 minutes. She nodded and ran off, and I noticed a ton of blood-covered rags all over the ground. Shaken up by her screams, I slowly picked up the rags and threw them out. I looked around and ran back to my office. The whole run, I didn't see anyone and didn't hear anything, which was weird because my boss said otherwise. I'll count my blessings here though, and find myself in front of the office finally. The man was leaving. This time I looked at him in complete terror, as he turned my way and said, "Come with me." I wasted no time running past him, into the office and slamming the door behind me. "What did I mess up?" I yelled over the sound of banging on the door as I pulled a jacket over my head. I shivered in fear for the entire hour until I heard 3 knocks on the door. I shot up, threw the door open and yelled, "What did you just put me through?" I was mad, although relieved to see him, who looked a lot more colorful and lifelike than he was in the past. He looked at me and smiled at me and said, "Go home, kid. Get some sleep. I yelled back. No, I want answers. You just can't tell me to go after the night I just had. He looked at me and said, You took care of my cemetery, kid. I thank you for that. He held out his hand for a handshake. The name's James Ryan Hackney, and I'd been dead for 200 years. Every Halloween, I leave the cemetery and recharge so my physical body doesn't perish. You covered me last night, and I thank you for that. It didn't take me long to recognize his name as the same on the gravestone that was dug up. I stared back at him, mouth wide open, speechless. I walked out of that door, packed my house up, and never came back to this town again. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Think of a time recently when you didn't feel like you could be your full self, like you were hiding behind a mask. As Mr. Creeps, I understand this more than you think. I feel this often whether I'm out in different social settings or hanging with friends and family. But through therapy, I've found that it helps me learn to accept all parts of myself, allowing me to take the mask off and be comfortable in my own skin. If therapy has ever interested you, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/MrCreeps today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MrCreeps. Peter, grab the locks from the garage. And hurry, we only have 2 hours left. I came back to Earth rather quickly and hustled towards the garage. That's when I heard a loud gunshot a few blocks away. I walked down the steps and flipped the light switch on in the garage. While I reached out for the locks, that's when it hit me. Tonight was Hallows' Eve. You see, our town every year has a tradition. I would call it more of a curse, but that's beside the point. Every single year on Halloween, something enters our town and takes 6 children for every 6 blocks. 3 boys and 3 girls. There's no way to stop the curse except avoid it at all costs. Lock your doors and board up your windows because this thing isn't human. That's all we know, simply because we've never had anyone who lives to tell us the tale of what truly is out there. I noticed these strange things happening around Halloween when I was 12 years young. I was laying down, trying to fall asleep. It couldn't have been more than an hour until I heard the yelling coming from my parents. While I was sitting in my bed, trying to make out what they were arguing about, my dog creaked open the door. I saw my dog walk down the steps and suddenly, their voices became clear. I heard my mother say, "Michael, we can't be here tomorrow. It's happening, don't you remember?" My dad retorted, "Of course I do, Linda. You don't think that I would send him to Jim's. Obviously I would, but no. Someone had to book a last-minute vacation and never thought to tell a dang soul. Not even their goddamn brother." Jim? Uncle Jim. He was talking about how every year I go to my cousin's for Halloween. My mother responded calmingly, "It's going to be okay, Michael. There's always a solution. Peter and I will go down to the storm shelter tomorrow night. You'll stay up here and watch over the house. He'll be inside. There's no need to worry." I started to slowly inch my way towards these stairs when I heard a knock on the door. Father spoke loudly. "Who is it?" He started to walk towards the door when another 3 knocks banged loudly against my door. I heard a man speak from behind the front door. "Deputy Sheriff's Department. Anyone home?" As I glanced around the wall, I saw a tall man with a shiny badge standing at the front door. He spoke. "How's it going tonight? I'm just stopping by to make sure that y'all stay inside tomorrow night because you know how things go around here. We don't want you going anywhere, so feel free to call the station if you have any questions or require any assistance tomorrow night. Anywho, have a good night now." He shot a look over towards me before stepping off our front porch, which didn't help much, considering my nerves and anxiety were going through the roof currently. Dad closed the front door after wishing the officer a safe night. Tomorrow would be my very first Halloween in this little town, since Kyle and Garrett are in the Bahamas. Like I had mentioned earlier, I spend Halloween with my cousins every year, who only live a few hours south from here. I loved when I go there because they lived in a full candy bar type of neighborhood. You know the type. Rich yuppies every so often, mini mansions, and sports cars around every turn. Also, my cousins are more akin to siblings to me since I'm an only child. I would rather go over there any time of the day than sit 5 more minutes in this creepy old town. The reason that I am documenting my experience here is for no other purpose than a warning. Don't try to search for this wicked town. Your intentions may be good, but all you'll walk out of this place with is more suffering than you thought was human. And I mean it too. You'll feel it as soon as you pass by that dang welcome sign. It sneaks up on you like a cobra in the forest. You feel it crawl up on your body and sink into your chest. The best way I can describe it is, you've been running down a dark tunnel for miles, but you haven't moved an inch. Mark my words when I tell you this. For anyone out there that wants to visit this wicked town, don't. That very night, my dad took his keys off the kitchen counter and hurried out the front door to go somewhere urgently. I woke up to a bunch of commotion downstairs. It sounded like a hammer banging up against a wall. Yawning, I rubbed my eyes and I stretched my arms out. I got up and went over to my parents' room to see my mother getting ready for the day. I looked at her and asked, "What's Dad doing downstairs?" She replied with, "Oh honey, he's just doing some work in the house for tonight, that's all." She patted my shoulder, reassuring me. Halloween is tonight. What work needs to be completed for Halloween? Decorating? I walked downstairs to look beyond the wall and saw my dad boarding up the front door. I was certainly confused on what he was doing, because what type of work for Halloween requires boards of wood shutting the front door off from the outside? I quickly acknowledged this and yelled over the banging, "Hey Dad, why are you locking us out?" Thinking to myself, I was confused. How would I be able to leave tonight to go trick-or-treating? After a moment, he replied with, "Not out, in." I'm sure your little mind is very confused because your mother and I haven't explained what's wrong with this town to you yet. I didn't even know what all of this meant, only being 12. I just wanted to go out and trick-or-treat. Last year was so fun and now my parents are taking it away from me. All I want is some candy, and for some strange reason, my dad is boarding up our house. I asked, "What do you mean wrong? What's wrong with this town?" My father must have smelled the concern dripping off of me, like a tile after being submerged in water. What was he locking us in from? He paused for a moment. "Let me explain. Every Halloween, something evil comes out of this town. It hides in the shadows within the streets and will wait to prey on 6 children for every 6 blocks until it reaches the end of our town. Last year, they counted 18 missing. Nobody knew what was taking the children because no one had ever set eyes on it and lived on till the next morning to inform us. As the sunlight turns pale on All Hallows Eve, remember this. You are never alone." My 12-year-old brain could only compensate for so much. One thing stood out to me. There were only 3 hours until sunset. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that my father was locking us inside with plywood boards all over our windows and doors now. What is it with this strange town? I've never really believed in monsters growing up, but now my parents believe something quite equal to that is out there. There's no way to get around this curse our town has. It's possessed with something that is far from human. I wanted to see what everyone was so scared of. I wanted to see this monster. It was almost 4 o'clock at this point, and my mother made father and I our favorite meal, a pastrami sandwich. I was parched after devouring my lunch, and my mother's famous iced tea suited the purpose. I was merely 2 sips away from finishing my drink when my father yelled from the other room, "Peter, grab the locks from the garage, and hurry, we only have 2 hours left." As the sun drifted away into darkness, the night crept upon the horizon, welcoming the evil in. My dad locked up the garage door and bolted 6 plywood boards upon the door into the house from the garage. He went to talk to my mother about something that I'm not quite sure of. I then heard my mother say, "Peter, honey, let's go downstairs now. Your father is going to stay up here for the night to make sure nothing happens to us. I'll cook us a meal for later while you get your things ready for the night." I walked up the stairs to see my dog laying at the top. I told him to come into my room and I closed my door. Looking out the window, I saw the sun setting. There was a purple-blue sky just over the sun's blissful orange corona. I stood there with my dog looking up at me for a few minutes just admiring the sunset. I wasn't worried about tonight, nor frightful. No, quite the opposite. I felt this overwhelming sense of curiosity of what was upon that horizon. It almost felt as if something was pulling me towards whatever it was. It started happening just moments after I saw that green burst of light you see after the sunset. This feeling inside of me gifted with courageous amounts of inquisitiveness. Something was boiling up in my head to go outside, and I just had to. Something sparked in my head. The key. I knew where the spare key was for the side door. If I could get that, I would be able to leave the house. The only problem is, my father will notice if I leave. I grabbed a sleeping bag and a few pillows downstairs. I dragged the sleeping bag all the way down to the basement while fighting my dog Max since he keeps biting the back of my sleeping bag. I walked past the kitchen, getting a whiff of the amazing chicken pot pie that my mother just cooked. I haven't had much of a thought on how I would get out tonight, but I did know how to get that key. It was on top of the refrigerator, so I climbed on top of the countertop next to the fridge. Feeling around the top of the refrigerator, I grabbed a few dust bunnies and the key. It was now dark out and I heard my mother calling me. "Peter, it's time. I have your meal down here. We need a shelter in place." I heard my father walking down the stairs and I shoved the key in my pocket. I was always a pretty good liar, so when he abruptly asked what I was doing, I said, "Just getting some water for us." I reached out towards the kitchen sink to turn it on. He replied with, "All right now, after that, get on down there with your mother." I smiled and took 2 glasses of water down to the basement, where I was met with my dog Max and my mother. I handed her a glass of water and said, "I'm pretty hungry after smelling those remnants in the kitchen that you left." She laughed and said, "I set up a table for us over there." She pointed towards the other side of the basement. I saw a candle with a dimly lit flame on top of an old wooden table. It was passed down by my great-grandmother. The table was an antique. I always remembered my mother saying not to touch it because I would get my fingerprints on it. I was shocked that she was letting me eat dinner on it. I gave her a hug and I sat down. Over this meal, I ever so slightly kept feeling that urge in the back of my mind. I kept envisioning what was outside on this cold night. I finished up my meal by dropping some leftovers to Max. It was probably a few hours into the night at this point, and now that inquisitiveness I felt earlier was dwelling inside of me. It was like the anticipation a child had to wake their parents up on Christmas morning. I told myself that this feeling must be acted on. I wanted to be rebellious and be the first to figure out what this creature was. I developed a plan in my head. I asked my mother, "Hey Mom, I need to go to the bathroom. Can I go upstairs?" She glanced over towards me and debated for a minute. "Yes, please hurry though," gesturing for me to go. I got up from my seat and walked up the creaky stairs. I unlocked the basement door to the main floor. My dad was sitting over near the front door overlooking the front yard. He was peeking out the blinds when he noticed me. "Boy, what are you doing up here?" he yelled. I needed to go to the bathroom. Mom tells me that she needs to use the phone." "Okay, just give me a minute, I'll be right back." He got up from his seat and walked towards the basement door. This was my one shot to get out. I ran towards the side door of the house and unbolted the 6-door locks and took the key from my pocket and inserted it into the keyhole. I turned it and a stimulating sense of adrenaline shot through my veins as I stepped foot outside into the night. I was running down the street, rotating my head to see both sides of the road, with houses boarded up like some ghost town. And that's when I heard it for the first time. It was this piercing tone that pulsates its way through your body. I felt the hairs on my body rise as I keened on where the sound was coming from. It was in the direction of my school. I wanted to stay hidden, so I took a longer way which took me on the park path. It would take 15 minutes to walk to the school from the way that I was taking, and I was 5 minutes away when I had my first encounter with that thing. I heard it snickering, sending a sudden jolt of terror-induced goosebumps. I got low to the ground. I heard it a few hundred yards to the right of me. It was pitch black and you could only hear a few crickets here and there. As soon as that thing made a noise, every other creature in the vicinity of it went quiet. It played that high-pitched snicker multiple times until it just stopped abruptly. I looked up to see if I could make anything out when I heard something else that caught my attention. I heard someone yelling in the distance. This creature must have heard it before I did because it went quiet. It took me a few tries to get exactly what the person was saying. It was definitely a male repeating something over and over again. Oh no, it was my father. My father called out to me. "Peter, come home! Peter, come out!" He was on the opposite path to the school, which was on the main road a few blocks from my house. There is a little forest in between us currently, but if I get to the school that wraps around. I also knew that if I yelled out, this thing would find me. I got up and I started to run. It was only 5 minutes away, and if I ran, I could make it in 3. My plan was to get inside the school, take a shortcut, exit the school, and reconnect with my dad. As the wind rushed past my face while I ran, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was in the field to the right of me, not even 15 feet away. I saw this thing hunched over, just peeking its muscular neck out for me, to see its black eyes glisten in the moonlight. That's all that I needed to see for my legs to move just a little faster. I could see the school in my view at this point, so I turned back to see if I was being chased. Nothing but the blank pit of darkness which consumed the night. The door was locked from the inside, and I needed a plan B. I looked around, but my hearing is what helped me that night. I heard my dad yell to the right of the building, so I headed that way. Right before I turned the corner to meet my dad, I heard that high-pitched tone that chilled you down to the bone. I felt some evil upon us, and I turned the corner to see my dad staring behind me. I looked at him with confusion, and that's when I sensed something behind me. We all were in the middle of the courtyard, and I asked, "Dad, I'm scared. What should I do?" He put his arm out and gestured a down motion for me to get to the ground. I understood this immediately and did what I was told. I got down on all fours and I laid on the ground. And that's when I heard it. "This boy is righteously mine. I shall take him back to my home." Its tongue slithered in a way that it said its words. It almost sounded like a snake, but humanoid. I was still turned away facing my dad when I saw him reach into his back with both hands. I heard something click when he began to speak. "You won't take my son, you monster. Go back to hell." My dad then pulled a pistol out from his back and aimed it at the creature. He didn't think twice about pulling the trigger. All I remember next was hearing that awful screech again, then hearing my dad in agony. He started screaming and I smelled a burnt flesh. I saw this thing attaching itself, burning my father's skin off of his head right in front of me. He looked at me and said one last thing. "I forgive you." This monster was morphing into my father, shifting and contorting his muscles, seizing his brain, and burning his flesh off, all the while it said, in that alienatic, emotionless voice, "Peter's next. Peter's next. Peter's next." My dad, with what little control left of his body, took the pistol and raised it to his mouth, shoved it down his throat, and he did it. With all of this commotion, the courtyard's lights flickered on and this creature began to flare up into a flame as the light shined down on it. I saw its veins spurt black liquid out as it died in agony. Its mouth was the last thing to ever move on it, and this sick demon said, "See you next Halloween, Peter." This all left me utterly speechless, as it would anyone. I sat there for hours until the police found me in my catatonic state. The reports showed that they found me up against a wall that had black liquid smeared all over the walls that read, "Free me." I don't remember much of what happened after this, but my mother called the police after neither my father nor I showed up. Nobody believes me when it comes to that night. They locked me up at our local psychological rehabilitation center. They called me a sicko. Trust me, I wouldn't make this stuff up. The courts didn't believe me when I told them about that monster that had killed my father. I was determined to clinically insane with a year of inpatient rehab. Apparently, the police said that they never found my dad's body. All that was found at the crime scene was a black sludge and a boy in shock from just witnessing his father's death. I've made myself pretty comfortable here at the hospital. After the first couple of weeks of hearing the often screams coming from the loonies in the hall, you get used to it. I've actually made some friends while here. The only thing that makes me want to tear down that door is hearing that sick demon whispering down the hall at night. It only happens every so often, but when it does, I cover my ears with my pillow and hope that it's not really there. Sometimes I'll be sitting eating that disgusting lunch they give us, and upon all the chattering, I hear it. It comes from the vent sometimes, or just outside the window where you can't see. Sometimes I even think I see him when I'm really tired and drowsy, after all of the meds that they give us here. He just sits at the end of my hall, waving at me, waiting. I was sentenced to a full year the day after Halloween. Today marks the beginning of Halloween, which means that he'll be back. I have to get out of here, or I'll end up just like my father. Maybe I should have just remained hidden. Jimmy returned for the first time exactly 1 year after the accident. I was home alone. Dad was at the bar and Mom was gone. We had crammed her into a pine box and shipped her off to the incinerator months ago. I had been sitting on the couch watching a plump cockroach scuttle across the coffee table, sipping whiskey that I had liberated the previous night after Dad had passed out. I wasn't quite drunk yet. At 11 years old, my tolerance to alcohol was comparable to most local stumblebum drunks. A knock came to the door. The gentle tap of brittle knuckles upon rotted wood. I paused with the rim of the bottle resting against my lips. Even the cockroach cocked its long antenna curiously towards the door. The local trick-or-treaters knew better than to come here seeking candy. Our ramshackle abode was always one DHS visit away from being condemned. And the cobwebs and sundry creepy crawlies in our front windows certainly weren't decorative. I reflexively choked out a sob when I opened the door and saw his ghostly form. The sheet draped over him was stained brown and soaked with stinking river water. "Jimmy?" I asked, my voice croaking in disbelief. As if to answer me, His jaw fell slack, and I heard the tiniest groan emerge from under that sheet, like a whining door hinge in a quiet house. He raised his hand to me and I shrank back in fear, expecting him to thrust an accusatory finger and damn me as a liar and murderer. Instead, I realized that he was holding his hand open, expecting something. A dry, throaty sound whistled up from his slackened jaw, and I suddenly understood what he wanted. My little brother had come back for his favorite holiday. I rushed up to my bedroom, reached under my bed, and grabbed Jimmy's pumpkin-shaped Halloween bucket. I flicked off the roaches and shook out the mouse crap and then ran back to the front steps, where my little brother was waiting. As Jimmy snatched his candy bucket from me, I saw them, watching us from the corner. It was the same group of older bullies that had harassed us last year, on the night of the accident. Last time, they had been wearing clown masks. They chose the Power Rangers this year. Despite their masks, I could tell that those bullies didn't quite believe what they were seeing. Jimmy had been presumed dead for a year, yet here he was, wearing the very same costume they had seen him wearing the night that he went missing. I had had a growth spurt since that night. Rage and self-hatred did wonders for a growing boy's physique. Fueled by whiskey and a desperate urge to blame anyone other than myself for Jimmy's death, I charged them. Outnumbered 4-1, I took some shots, no doubt, but I routed them regardless, and I left one of them bleeding on the sidewalk. And then I returned to Jimmy, smiling, and hooked my pinky around his before we set off to celebrate Halloween. I sat on my couch, eyes trained on the flickering candle on my coffee table. The power had been out for a month and I hadn't seen any good reason to turn it back on. I would only be cutting into my meager booze budget, and besides, the city was kicking me out in a few days. The house had been bought and paid for by some long-dead relative and then passed on to my parents as an act of pity. When Dad finally kicked the bucket, he left the house to me, but I was never quite able to stay ahead of the property taxes. I wasn't going to miss the place. It wasn't exactly full of fond memories. At this time of night, I would normally be blackout drunk, but tonight was Halloween and I didn't want to miss Jimmy. My entire life had amounted to a hill of crap, but I promised to never let my little brother down again. I checked the time, 8 o'clock on the dot. I grabbed Jimmy's Halloween bucket and headed out front. Jimmy never did tell me why Halloween was his favorite holiday. He had been a gentle kid, small for his age, fair-skinned and wispy. You wouldn't have known it if you looked at him, but he preferred the schlock and gore of October grindhouse horror movie marathons to kitty far more appropriate to his age. He never flinched at the scary parts, when the reanimated undead wreaked havoc or dream demons emerged to slash open teenage throats. I had never attributed his love of Halloween to something so cliché as donning a mask to pretend to be someone else. Though I wouldn't have blamed him. No, I always suspected that Jimmy loved this time of year specifically because it was when the world went dim and happily embraced the horrific. Vampires and possessed dolls and werewolves made more sense than the more abstract horrors that we faced at home. Or crap, maybe the kid just really liked candy. I stepped outside and the riverwards were alive with grinning jack-o'-lanterns, windows glowing orange and framed with fake spiderwebs, and scores of yuppie parents leading their kids door to door. I spotted him walking slowly towards the house. I swore, he got smaller every year. I waved to him. He didn't wave back, but he did cock his head slightly, as if he was struggling to remember who I was. As always, he was wearing the filthy sheet soaked in river water. I felt a passing wave of revulsion and guilt when I glimpsed the faded bloodstains where the fabric hugged Jimmy's misshapen occipital. I smiled and offered him the bucket. Jimmy snatched it from my hand, though there were only darkness within those crooked eye holes I had cut into the sheet 25 years ago. So I knew that if he still had eyes, they would have been gleaming. I reached down to his hand, hooked my pinky around his, and took my little brother trick-or-treating, like I had done every year since he had first returned. This wasn't our neighborhood anymore. Sure, the names of these streets were the same, but that was about it. The yuppie influx, with the ensuing rent increases and property tax hikes, had squashed out most of the old guard. The newbies didn't care for these sturdy, century-old houses forged with brick and mortar. One by one, those stout homes were being flattened to make way for flimsier, more stylish facades. Soon, our childhood home was going to suffer the same fate. Jimmy must have sensed that something was amiss because he tightened his pinky around mine. Though I hadn't heard his voice since that night by the river, his pinky squeeze said enough. It said, "I've got you." When Mom wept at the dinner table as we split a dried hunk of welfare cheese for dinner, I would give Jimmy a squeeze. When Dad staggered home drunk and started laying into Mom, I would join Jimmy on his small twin mattress. We would squeeze pinkies, eyes shut tight, with pillows over our ears so we wouldn't have to hear Dad's fist knocking against Mom's head. "I've got you." Tonight, we stopped at every house that still had its lights on. Our new neighbors smiled awkwardly, genuinely troubled by the sight of the neighborhood drunk escorting a child in a raggedy ghost costume. I didn't give a crap what they thought as long as they tossed a few bite-sized Snicker bars into Jimmy's bucket. Soon, the streets began to empty and the trick-or-treaters went home. One by one, those grinning jack-o'-lanterns went dark, those orange window lights dimmed, and it was just Jimmy and I wandering the lonely streets. We headed back toward the house. This was where we would normally part ways, with Jimmy heading back on his own. Tonight, though, I remained at his side. He cocked his head again, curious. I squeezed his pinky. Though I loved Jimmy, he was still my little brother, and often I treated him as such. Just because I hated the neighborhood bullies didn't mean I didn't glean some pointers from their abuse. Sometimes I would slap Jimmy around or steal his toys because he had annoyed me somehow. Other times, I just wanted to feel stronger than someone else. The day of his death, Jimmy had put me into a foul mood. Using the 5-finger discount, I had gotten comic books from the drugstore on York Street, and I was looking forward to thumbing through them. Jimmy came rushing into our bedroom, crying because the rats had gotten to his hand-me-down Jason Voorhees costume. The critters had gnawed through the plastic hockey mask and left the fake blood-splattered overalls stinking like rat turds. I told him to take it up with Mom and Dad, but he said that Mom was passed out and Dad was at the bar, as usual. My mood instantly turned black, not necessarily because of Jimmy, but because, once again, I would have to pick up the slack for our parents. I cooked most of Jimmy's meals. I scrubbed the stink off of his clothes and got him ready for school every morning, while Mom and Dad were off, drunk and doped. All I wanted was a night to myself, curled up on my bed with some stolen comic books, but they couldn't stay sober long enough to even give me that much. Somehow, I kept my temper in check. I got him to stop sobbing by yanking the sheet off his bed, cutting out those mismatched eye holes and draping it over him. "There," I said. "You're a ghost now." His green eyes were visible through the holes in the sheet. His cheeks perked up under the sheet, and I could tell that he was smiling. "Can you take me trick-or-treating?" he asked. No, I didn't want to, but I also didn't want him crying again, and Mom would have beaten the crap out of me if I let Jimmy wander the neighborhood alone. And so we set out into the streets, amongst a legion of Ninja Turtles and Ghostbusters and Barbie dolls brought to life. Though it was simple, he enjoyed his makeshift costume. I was just hoping to get through the night without bumping into our enemies. That was certainly naive of me. It didn't take long for them to zero in on us. There were 4 of them, all older boys. Even the smallest one towered over me. They were wearing clown masks, thin plastic, smiling red-nosed clowns that filled my stomach with dread. None of the parents milling about with their kids noticed the brewing confrontation, not with the dozen of trick-or-treaters clogging the sidewalk. Jimmy clutched his candy bucket to his chest. One of the bullies reached for it, and that was when I snapped. I couldn't help it. I might have been upset at him for dragging me out here, but this was Jimmy's favorite night of the year. I couldn't watch some bullies ruin it for him. I swung hard. My fist connected with the bully's face, and I heard a loud crunch right before blood trickled down from behind the clown's visage. I grabbed Jimmy by the wrist and we took off into the throngs of costumed kids. We rounded the next corner and disappeared into an alley. We hid there, holding our breath as the bullies sped past. There was no way they were going to let us go. 2 of them would likely roam the neighborhood looking for us, while the other 2 would lay in wait near our home. "What are we gonna do?" Jimmy asked, voice quivering in fear. Every night, right before I black out, I think about how I should have just squeezed his pinky. But I didn't. Instead, I blamed him. We wouldn't have been in this trouble if he hadn't been such a crybaby back home. That was why, of the dozens of places we could have gone to hide, I chose the river, because I knew he was terrified of the river. Today, the Delaware riverfront was as gentrified as the rest of the neighborhood. A casino and towering condominiums loomed large, and quaint pedestrian walkways were infested with pop-up beer gardens. In our youth, the riverfront had been an industrial graveyard, dominated by long-shuttered factories with stretches of wilderness between them. Stinking sumac trees swayed overhead and plump river rats darted through the bushes. This wasn't the first time that we had to hide back here. Jimmy always hated it. Although the neighborhood lay only a quarter mile to the west, Jimmy thought the riverfront was too isolated. He feared that if our bullies ever caught us here, they would kill us and no one would ever know. My mood hadn't improved when we finally reached one of the piers. Big gray concrete blocks jutting out 50 feet into the sloshing water, supported by a number of wood pilings underneath. Jimmy remained a few feet behind me, still in his costume, nervously gripping his Halloween bucket. The tide was coming in, and he jumped every time he felt a wave hit the pilings beneath us, as if the pier might collapse. But what scared Jimmy the most was the possibility of falling into the water, that those rough green-brown waves might trap him under the pier, where he would come up for air and smash his face against unyielding concrete instead. "Can we just please try to go home?" he whined. "No," I snapped back. "Not unless you want those bullies to knock your teeth out." He lowered his head. "But I don't like it back here." Looking at my whimpering little brother, I lost all sense of empathy. After running scared from our bullies, I was eager to assert myself as an alpha. I yanked him toward the edge of the pier. "I'm so tired of you acting like a wimp," I snarled. I shoved him closer to the edge, where the water sloshed violently 10 feet below us. "There's nothing to be afraid of back here." "I just want to go home," he cried, the eye holes in the sheet now rimmed with tears. "Stop being such a baby," I shouted then instinctively, giving him a stiff right hook to the shoulder. What happened next occurred within seconds, yet in my memory, it seems to play out for an eternity. I had hit him harder than I had meant to. Jimmy dropped his candy bucket and then staggered as his shoes got caught in the pool of fabric underfoot. I watched in muted disbelief as he flopped over the pier, arms waving, right before the back of his head cracked against the concrete edge. There was a splash 10 feet beneath me, and my brother was gone, leaving behind nothing more than a red patch on the concrete and white bubbles breaking the water's surface. Pinky's lot, we maneuvered through condominium parking lots and empty beer garden stalls until we reached that old pier. For a moment, my memories blended with the present and I saw myself, cold and shivering and soaked with river water, trudging back toward the neighborhood alone, clutching Jimmy's candy bucket. I remember how cold and dark the river was when I dove in, fighting the waves, trying in vain to find my brother before finally giving up. I never told anyone what happened. That night when I got home, Mom was still passed out and Dad hadn't come back from the bar yet. I hid my wet clothes then, and later told them that Jimmy had simply run away from me. I was terrified of what would happen if they knew the truth. There was a police search that amounted to nothing. Dad didn't seem to care very much. Months later, Mom swallowed 40 sleeping pills and never woke up. I took to stealing swigs of Dad's half-empty liquor bottles to soothe my guilt, a habit that had served me ever since. But even that relief has proved fleeting. As Jimmy and I walked along the pier, I tightened my pinky around his, content to die sober. We stood at the edge of the pier. Though I couldn't see his face, I could tell that he was no less afraid of the river now than he had been 25 years ago. Jimmy stepped off the pier and disappeared into the water below. I wondered, once this pier was inevitably torn asunder to make way for a condo or another casino, would Jimmy still resurface on Halloween? If he did, and he ventured into the neighborhood, would he even recognize that the shiny new studio apartments were standing on the grave of our old house? Either way, I was going to make sure that he didn't have to go through it alone. I stepped off the pier, just like Jimmy had that night. I cracked the base of my skull against that concrete lip. A lightning flash of pain shot across the world, and I crashed hard into the water, pushed at once by the tide under the pier. A wave slammed me against one of the pilings and I felt something snap at my back, and when I tried to scream, filthy river water filled my mouth. And yet as I was thrashed about under the dock, my consciousness slowly fading, I felt Jimmy's tiny pinky finger squeezing around my own. "I've got you." That happened almost 1 year ago last Halloween. Though I wanted nothing more than to slip into a watery slumber with my little brother, he must have felt otherwise. I woke up weeks later in a hospital. They removed patches of my skull to relieve the pressure from the brain bleed, courtesy of cracking my head on that concrete lip. My ribs had been shattered to splinters from the paramedics' vigorous chest compressions. They had found me on the road, which meant Jimmy had dragged me from the water, across the industrial wilderness, and then out to the waiting blacktop. I asked the medics if there had been a boy in a ratty ghost costume with me when they had arrived. They said they hadn't seen one. Anyway, I'm writing this on the computer at the public library right off Girard Avenue, but I'd better finish up. The librarian is a real asshole. Doesn't like it when street bums like me stink up the joint. It's almost Halloween once again. Jimmy might not want me to be down in the water with him, but I'm going back to join him regardless. I've got his candy bucket, so we can hit the neighborhood one last time. I've also got a box cutter with the sharpest razors I could find. Once Jimmy slips back into the water, I'm going to open myself up. And I'm jumping into that green-blue Delaware water right along with him. Because I'm Jimmy's big brother, goddanggit. I won't let him swim alone. Before I start, I want to know if you're worth saving. I wonder if this was you, if this was your decision, what would you do? Would you give in and surrender yourself to your fate, and be comforted with the fact that you have saved billions of lives? Or run? Have you ever been punished for something which wasn't your fault? It sucks, doesn't it? When I was in kindergarten, Jonas Lockhart complained someone had stolen his milk and made such a big deal about it, kicking and screaming and stamping his feet, that our teacher had strictly told us that none of us would be getting milk for the rest of the week until the thief came forward. They didn't, obviously. We all knew you didn't hide milk because it would get warm and lumpy. The culprit had quickly swigged the contents and cleverly hidden the evidence right under everyone's nose. So our teacher kept her word and made sure that none of us had milk for the rest of the week. Instead, she brought in apple juice boxes which tasted sour. That day would then go on to be labeled the Great Milk Incident and was the sole reason behind the genius idea to start marking names on each kid's carton. I remember sitting cross-legged on prickly carpet, squeezing my half-empty apple juice. I was seething. It wasn't fair. I wanted to cry out. It wasn't fair that we all had to be punished for someone else's stupid mistake. I had no idea how good I had it. I had the luxury of being a naive child, being able to wear rose-tinted glasses, and to have no idea they were even shading my eyes, protecting me from a secret my town didn't even try to hide. I was 6 when I realized life wasn't as good as I thought, and milk thieves weren't the only bad thing in the world. Noah Sharp was the town's golden boy and destined for an Ivy League. He was also my mother's friend's son, and he often came around to hang out and watch SpongeBob SquarePants with me after school. I remember Noah had a great laugh and told jokes that made me spew milk out of my nose. Noah Sharp was my mother's murderer, and the worst part, he didn't even know that he was doing it, didn't even have control over his actions. This is what I was told, at least. I was told that Noah would never intentionally murder my mom. I didn't understand what was happening when my mom locked all the doors one night and told me to hide under the kitchen table. I knew there was a certain day every year where I had to stay extra quiet and not go near the doors or windows, but Mom had never told me to get under the table. She always protected me from figuring out what was really going on, from tearing off my rose-tinted glasses and seeing reality for what it truly was. A town suffocated by a curse, which turned the senior class into monsters, and it had recently taken hold of Littlewood's golden boy. I hadn't been expecting Noah to break through the window along with 3 others. I recognized them as other seniors that he hung out with. Poppy, who worked at the diner. She always gave me extra chocolate syrup on my sundae. And then there was Lucy, our paper girl who always smiled at me wildly and asked if there were fairies in my yard. I used to feel safe around them, enjoying their hissed conversations and giggles. I liked it when they came over to talk to me and complimented my Patrick Star shirt. I didn't understand why Mom was so scared of them at first. The 4 of them looked exactly like the older kids that I knew. But something was wrong, and I was too young to see it. These kids were devils hiding in plain sight, monsters bleeding from the dark, shadows with no faces. Noah was the first to come through the door, whistling a Disney song that I automatically knew. You've got a friend in me. Something ice cold slithered down my spine when I saw him swinging a carving knife around like he knew exactly how to use it. His footsteps were slow and calculated, playful as he stepped back and forth, laughing, calling out if anyone was home while my mom pushed me under the table and stepped in front of it, blocking me from his view. I remember the gleam in his eye when he walked in, and found my sobbing mother begging him to get back. I started to tell her that it was Noah, and that he would never hurt us, even after catching his fingers tightening around the wooden handle of the knife. The twist in his lips knotted my tummy. The friendly smile that I had known for most of my life was gone. Everything that I knew of him was gone. Noah didn't see me under the table the night that he had grabbed my mother by the neck, wrenched her head back and sliced open her until she was spluttering and gurgling on her own blood. The human mind is a strange thing. It will automatically try and block out potential trauma before you can fully register it. But there was no way that I couldn't. There was no way that I couldn't see what had happened to my mom. Noah didn't stop with her throat. He went to her stomach until the teeth of the blade was slick red, and he was panting, laughing, and giggling into my mother's hair. I remember watching pooling red stain her prized carpet and wondering if she was going to get mad, and then realizing that my mom wasn't moving. The four of them left after trashing my living room. The other three bounded out of the front door, while Noah grabbed our TV and flung it at the window, shattering the glass. It was when the strangled cry escaped my lips and his head whipped around, dark eyes shining in the dim. He didn't even look at me. Noah looked straight through me, his mouth breaking into a monstrous grin. He was covered in her, covered in my mother, startling red, spattering his face and coating his hair. But he didn't seem to care, instead reveling in it, in his own undoing. It was an insanity I didn't know, understand, or knew existed, but I knew that it was him. It was all of him, everything that made the boy up. A lapse in lucidity and a madness twisting his expression into a monster that I had imagined under my bed. He scanned the kitchen for a moment, half-lidded eyes flicking back and forth, before bidding me a salute and diving out into the night. I stayed under the table until sunrise, just like Mom had told me. Every other year, she had treated it like a game, and I had been too blinded by excitement to realize that it was a distraction. "Okay, B," Mom whispered into my hair through panicked breathing. "We're going to play a fun new game." "What kind of game?" I asked, flinching when I felt her body seize up, her quivering hand coming to rest over my mouth. There was a bang from outside, followed by laughter. Mom ducked down lower, holding me tighter, so tight that I thought I was going to suffocate against her woolly sweater. "We're going to see how long we can stay under here," she breathed, "and you have to stay extra quiet, okay?" With my mom's phantom words ringing in my head, I buried my face in my knees and stayed as still and quiet as possible. I could hear them outside. Without Mom to clamp her hands over my ears and black them out, they were in vivid clarity that I couldn't ignore or deny. Their war cries and whooping, cheering and laughing from boys and girls alike, followed by screaming, the sound of a baseball bat shattering a windscreen, and thundering footsteps as they ran past my house like animals. The noise bled into the night and then the early hours. There was a girl's voice at the door. She asked if there was anyone inside, and I opened my mouth to tell her that my mommy was hurt, that I was scared. But she started laughing and I could hear the crack of her head slamming into the hardwood. She didn't stop. I wanted her to stop, but she continued, moving around the house and banging on the windows. The girl never came inside, making it her goal to make sure I stayed stiff, paralyzed to the spot. The next day, the police found me. I couldn't move. My mother's blood was congealing on the carpet, and the police officer, wearing a forced smile, took me away from my mom's still body and my trashed house, and I found myself living with my aunt. I wanted to know why Noah and his friends had taken my mother away from me, but I was only kept in the dark and given lame excuses because apparently the truth was too much for a little kid to handle. So I continued to live in the dark. I did notice days and weeks after my mom's death that I didn't see any older kids. I usually saw them biking around town or in the diner talking over burgers and milkshakes, but there was no sign of them. No sign of Noah. The town had been turned upside down. Store windows still smoldering from being set alight. Crumbling houses with their windows smashed through. There was a flower memorial in the town square, and then a candlelit vigil that I was urged to attend. It wasn't just my mom they had taken. They had killed others too. Other families, other moms and dads. Kids. But I couldn't understand why. I got my answer a few years later. When our mayor first told my 3rd grade class about Littlewood's curse, he used the example that I gave you, the stupid milk story. I don't know if the teacher had told him or maybe it was just a coincidence. I personally think that it was too soft in the blow. If you straight up tell a group of little kids that their fate is becoming twisted psychopaths in 11 years, they're going to freak out, and rightfully so. However, if you add something they recognize, like putting on the voice of a well-known cartoon character, or in this case, using the story of the Great Milk Incident as a metaphor, we would be more likely to understand. And we did, sort of. I got the idea anyway. He didn't explain it very well, often tripping over his words and using manic hand gestures, but I managed to understand. After all, I desperately wanted an explanation behind what had happened to my mother, from a boy that I had trusted with my life, only for him and most of the older kids in town to vanish without a trace, without repercussions for their actions. According to the mayor, October 1st, 1799, 20 18-year-olds died in a tragic fire, and their souls had refused to pass on, refused to forgive a town which let them die. So these kids decided to take it out on us. You see, kids, sometimes you'll get punished for things that are not your fault. Our mayor had told us, and that's okay. It was a last screw you to future generations who had absolutely nothing to do with their death. It was the townspeople who had screwed them over, so why were we in the firing line? It didn't make any sense to me. The town didn't call it a curse. We were supposed to call it a phenomenon, but the deceased spirits of ancient kids who refused to die, filling every generation's head and turning them into twisted psychopaths. It definitely wasn't a phenomenon. We were cursed. They had turned Noah into my mother's killer, and would do that every year following, including my class. The youth of our town were cursed to be murderers from sunset to sunrise. And what did we do? Well, nothing. Because what could we do? Leaving town wasn't an option. Apparently neighboring towns were convinced that it was some kind of virus which could spread. So anyone under the age of 18 was stuck, literally and figuratively. If we tried to leave, regardless of age, we were locked away in a room of white. I should know. I tried to skip town at the age of 10 and I spent 3 months in a specialized hospital ward. Which leads me to last year, October 2021. It was my 17th teen purge, and the first time that I had actually been caught up in it. I wouldn't count the time when I was 6. I was merely an observer, as I watched my mother butchered right in front of me. Noah and his class were identified as her killers, but as far as I knew, they had gotten a pass because it wasn't technically their fault. I found out from my aunt that the senior class were shipped off quietly the morning of October 3rd to avoid complications. I never saw them again, which was a good thing. If I ever saw Noah's face again, I knew that I would hurt him. The child inside of me didn't care about a stupid curse. I had still seen him kill Mom with his own hands, his twisted smile and glittering eyes. As I grew up, I grew less frightened of the teen purge and more curious. By the age of 12, I was guarding my front door wielding a baseball bat. I only had a vague notion of self-defense, but if the door so much as rattled, I knew my cowardice would send me hurtling up the stairs and barricading myself in the room. I didn't think that I would ever wake up tied to a sun lounger with Olivia Rodrigo blasting in my ears, but I guess there's a first for everything. That's what you get when you turn Gen Z into twisted psychos. I had a vague memory of locking my aunt's doors and windows as usual and giving her a hug before she left for the night shift. I went upstairs to my room, crawled into bed, and drifted off to the sound of Super Eyepatch Wolf's most recent retrospective on a TV show that I didn't even watch. I don't remember them snatching me from my room, just the aftermath, and a vague memory of a girl with a Cheshire cat grin throwing my laptop against my bedroom wall. The Wonderland smile. That's what I had pegged that look of insanity on their faces. I awoke with a dull pounding in both my temples and the dizzying realization that I had been thwacked from behind. A baseball bat maybe, more lead pipe. Wakey wakey. The guy's shriek sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Someone cranked the music louder and I was enveloped in a sense of utter surrealness, pushing away the fog in my brain and my spinning head, trying to jar itself off of its axis. Maybe I had been infected with the Littlewood curse a year early, because hysterical guffaws of laughter were bubbling and brewing in my throat, threatening to let rip. I felt honored in a way. I had actually been invited to a senior party. I had been trying to sneak into one for 3 years and they had let me in for free. The idiots even escorted me themselves. If I was going to die before I was inevitably turned into a monster, which would rip away an innocent life in my future, so be it, right? Taking a moment to swallow my laughter when I really shouldn't have been laughing in that situation, I assessed my surroundings. I was kneeling on something plastic, my bare knees stinging from stagnating in the same position. I definitely wasn't alone. I counted at least 3 pairs of hands bound to mine in what felt like jump rope, and something was stuck to my face. Silly string. I knew this sting from my childhood where I thought it was a good idea to spray silly string all over my aunt's living room. There was also certain things that I was trying to ignore. I had been hit hard enough to send my brain spiraling, and the more that I thought about the possibility of brain damage, I was just freaking myself out and imagining things. I was fine. The blood running down my chin and tainting my lips was normal, especially in a town like Littlewood where it was the norm to find cannibalized townies strung up around the town like they were prizes. Hey, someone was in front of me. I could feel their breath tickling my face. It stunk of rot. I said, wakey wakey. Huh? What was that, Taryn? The sound of tape being ripped from flesh made me cringe. Taryn was a freshman boy who lived down the road from me. I said, screw you. He was met with hyena-like shrieks of laughter, and I bowed my head, panting into uncomfortable stickiness against my lips. Was I really going to die? When I finally managed to pry my eyes open, my vision was a confusing blur of nothing before I shook my head, hopefully dislodging my brain from the puddle of maple syrup that it had rolled into. As my vision returned slowly, I found myself staring at a pool of glittering water. It was an overwhelmingly beautiful sight, or maybe that was just the concussion talking. Ignoring the boy crouched in front of me, I focused on gentle ripples of water glittering under hypnotic lights, a stray beer can floating on the surface. I was kneeling on a bright orange sun lounger with 3 other bodies uncomfortably pressed to mine, and at least 3 layers of duct tape over my mouth. The boy crouching in front of me was Tommy Nolan, a quiet senior on the school newspaper who looked like he was dying inside if he looked him directly in the eye. Under the control of Littlewood's curse, however, Tommy Nolan adapted the same psychotic grin and glittering look in his eyes, like it would thrill him just to cut me open and see what was inside. He had already started. I noticed his latest victims once opening my eyes, and judging from the muffled shrieks and violent squirming from the others tied to me, so would they. I was trying to concentrate on my own life, teetering on the edge of the immortal coil, but every so often my half-lidded eyes would find the startling spatter of red, glistening under patio lights, which caused a visceral reaction that I was struggling to keep under a cool facade. There was nothing like showing them that you were terrified. I think I could have actually died that night. My body ripped apart and my head put on a spike for the rest of the town to see the next morning. But sometimes miracles happen, and that miracle happened to be loose restraints. I remember being paralyzed to the spot, staring wide-eyed at the trail of guts splattered across the patio, handprints and smiley faces written in pooling crimson. They didn't just kill the owners of the house. They played with their bodies, marking their presence with entrails. I was aware of a girl jumping up from the sun lounger and grabbing my hand, urging me to run with her, and I did. I ran, I didn't look back, but they weren't following us. Like zombies or vampires or any other mythical monster, Tommy and his group had caught movement ahead of them and gone in for the kill. While I was running, I made a silent pact with myself that I had to die before I turned 18. I would, I don't know. I'd throw myself in front of a car or something, but I wouldn't become one of them. But there's a huge difference between thinking about doing something and actually doing it. I tried. I stepped out in front of traffic in the summer with full intention to throw myself in front of a truck, except my legs wouldn't move. When I tried to move them, my body stiffened up and my brain freaked out. I tried doing other things, but I only ended up in the emergency room. I couldn't do it. Something inside me still wanted to live. My 18th birthday came and went, and before I knew it, I was biking to school on October 1st, 2022. 5 hours before the curse took effect, and I was late for quarantine. The town had no way to stop us causing havoc after trying every method in the recent years, but nothing worked. If we were knocked out, we would wake up seconds later. If we were tied up, we would pull ourselves out of our restraints. And quarantine was the school's attempt at locking us in, but every year they got out, so I didn't exactly have hope for our year. I wasn't thinking much of anything at that moment. I was just enjoying the cool graze of wind on my cheeks and blowing back my hair. I was watching a spiral of fall leaves caught up in a whirlwind when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I hesitantly pulled it out with one hand. Is it me, or are people being even worse to us today? The voice was familiar and immediately put me in a better mood. Kenji. I had been anxiously waiting for him to call most of the day. It's you. No, but if you just listen to me, I have solid evidence. I felt my lips pricking into a smile. You're paranoid, I said with an eye roll. Across the street, though, an old woman was staring directly at me as I biked past. Mrs. Renfield was the owner of the local thrift shop, and used to offer me candy bars when I was a little kid. I was so used to her kind smile and the wrinkle between her brow like she was permanently deep in thought. But right then, she was just standing there, eyes narrowed, like I was a freakish devil spawn. Ignoring a shiver slithering down my spine, I focused on the road. I retract that statement, I murmured. Mrs. Renfield just shot me the death glare. And Kenji scoffed. No, Mrs. Renfield has always given people the death stare. It's like her quirk. Nope. Tightening my one-handed grip on my handlebars, I pedaled faster. And this time it was definitely personal. Ouch, he said. I mean, it makes sense though, right? Everyone hates us. We're the town pariahs until sunrise. I spluttered. Wow, that makes me feel so much better. Thanks, Kenji. His laugh loosened the knot in my gut. You're really bad at sarcasm, he said. Ooh, wait, I can see you ahead. I could hear him behind me. His yell entangled in a particularly tumultuous gust of wind, which almost sent me tumbling. B, hey, slow down. I did, twisting around to see Kenji catching up to me. He was a fast-moving blur of dark brown hair spiraling in the wind and kicking legs going to town on his pedals. It was the worst day of all our lives, and yet he was still smiling. I liked that about him. The world could be ending and Kenji would still have an infectious grin on his face. I couldn't help smiling when he finally caught up to me. And Kenji was your average, conventionally attractive guy. Tall and athletic with a Hollywood smile, and striking Asian American features which had been described as exotic by our classmates until he called them out, and rightfully so. Kenji didn't take any crap and smiled at the world like it wasn't royally screwing him over. I think that's why I gravitated towards him. Hey look, no hands, he yelled behind me, and I twisted around to laugh. Are you trying to fall? Maybe. His laugh caught in the wind. I could hear his panting breaths getting closer and closer. Yo. Kenji saluted me with a two-fingered salute. When I got a proper look at his expression, his smile wasn't as bright as usual. It wasn't surprising considering that it was our judgment day, but somehow I still expected him to push his way through the negativity. I guess I was wrong. When I caught his eye, he wasn't quite looking at me, more like right through me. His thoughts elsewhere, probably with his mom. There was a haunted vacancy in his eyes that I couldn't bring myself to fully take in, like he was already being twisted hours before. Still though, when I forced a smile this way, he seemed to snap out of it and he shook his head, sucking in a lungful of air. Now don't you just love the smell of pollution and cat poop at this time in the evening? Oh yeah, I shot him a grin. Nothing like the stink of an animal's decaying digestive system to make me feel alive. He laughed before piping up with, what would you do if an asteroid was destined to hit us? Weird question. I don't know, I guess I'd spend as much time as possible with my loved ones. And what if you could stop it? The asteroid? I scoffed. How? He tipped his head back and groaned. Dude, just answer. Oh, well, yeah, I said. Of course I would stop it if it's going to kill billions of people and end life as we know it. Kenji's smile darkened slightly. Even if the asteroid had killed you in the process. Something about his words drew the breath from my lungs. Why are you asking me this? He looked like he might reply before seemingly deciding against it. Whatever he wanted to say had faded when the curl in his lip had pricked into a smile. I'm just envisioning going to visit my dad before Christmas. If I can get through tonight, I'm good. I couldn't help but notice that every store in the town center was either closed or shutting down early. There was a little girl standing outside the hardware store clutching an iPad. When she caught my eye, she ducked her head. I knew exactly how she felt. When I was a kid and knew of Littlewood's curse, I hated the elder kids. I wanted them gone. For killing my mom and for ruining my life. That's a good way to think, I said, swallowing hard. You literally have the 15 sleeps till Christmas mentality. He snorted. Hey, it's better to laugh than cry, right? The closer that we were getting to school, I was feeling progressively sicker. What are your plans for after? After? When we're kicked out of town, I said. I heard that there's a halfway house they're sending us to, but don't you want to run? He chuckled. Where will we go? They said that they were going to protect us and continue our education until we get to college. I sent him a look. Do you honestly want to stay in some halfway house under constant surveillance? And that's if we don't. I trailed off. but to my surprise he continued in a sharp breath, his tone darkening. What if we brutally murder someone? Well, yeah, I said, but that's not going to happen. This time Kenji laughed harshly. I'd say the odds are fairly against us considering our town's track record. We stopped at some stops, but Kenji kept going, speeding up. Something warm crept up my throat and I kicked myself into a manic pedal. What are you doing? Kenji came to a stop and twisted around. A thought experiment, he said, trailing the sidewalk with the heels of his Doc Martens. If I fall and die, won't that save my future victim? He laughed, but it was choked, almost hysterical. If I'm destined to kill someone, and I die right here, right now, won't they live? I'll be saving someone instead of murdering them. This time, he wasn't even trying to hide the hollow look in his eyes. He was smiling, but it was too big. A gaping grimace. Almost a Wonderland smile. Kenji, I said sharply, stop. He did, coming to an abrupt halt before his bike could hurtle down the steps. He was panting, his grip tightening on his handlebars. I'm going to see my dad, he said. I'm going to see my dad as soon as this is all over, and I've left the halfway house. And everything will be okay. He turned to me with hopeful eyes. Right? We're going to be okay, B. I swallowed words, suffocating my mouth all the way to school. I couldn't give him the response that he wanted. When we arrived at school, Kenji and I were cuffed and led to the gymnasium where most of the senior class already were. If it weren't for the glitter of silver I caught on everyone's wrist, I would have thought that I was walking into a pep rally. It wasn't as dystopian as I had imagined. Spirits were unusually high. At least they were on one side. The varsity team were hyping each other up for reasons that nobody knew. Lily Marriott was trying to lift morale by preaching to a group of wide-eyed kids about God, and that he was going to protect us. P.S. I didn't say that though, as Kenji led me to the middle of the room where most of our class were either lying in their jackets or staring at the wall looking like they wanted the ground to swallow them up. Kenji dropped down onto the floor with a smile way too wide for someone who had a 99.9% chance of committing a felony against his will, leaning back on his elbows. He pulled out his earphones. I followed, hesitantly sitting next to him. I heard if you listen to loud music, the curse doesn't get you, Kenji murmured, untangling his earphones. That's just another lie. Jonas Lockhart slumped down with us, and I caught the exact moment Kenji decided he was going to shuffle closer towards me. And Kenji was out of the closet and had been crushing on Jonas since freshman year. He revealed said crush while drunk at a junior prom, only for Jonas to ignore him and then make out with Wendy Carmichael 10 minutes later. Drama. Since then, Kenji had made it his mission to keep his distance, and Jonas wasn't getting the hint. I had a feeling that Jonas was struggling with his own sexuality, and Kenji was kind of impatient. Also, they were both too stubborn to admit feelings and they were being equally immature. Still though, at least Jonas was trying. He plucked an earphone from the boy and corked one into his ear. Fleetwood Mac. Jonas nodded with a smile. Nice. With his hand still cuffed in front of him, Kenji awkwardly yanked the earphone from the guy with a scowl. I'm sorry, do you hear something, B? He pretended to squint. I can't see anyone though, but I can hear a slight breeze. Oh, you're a comedian, Kenji. Jonas rolled his eyes. I just wanted to know if you want to have a smoke. I know a guy who can uncuff us before Mrs. Hill catches us. He leaned back with a sigh. You know, before we're all turned into actual crazies. Nah, I'm okay, Kenji murmured. Jonas cocked a brow. Oh really? Because there are some things we should probably talk about. Maybe if you want to. I said I'm okay. Kenji. I nudged him when Jonas jumped up and walked away, his shoulders thumped. You do realize that he's trying to talk to you, right? He avoided my side eye, a smile crawling on his lips. Oh, I know, but it's more fun to ignore him. You two look like crap. Kenji looked up and I followed his gaze. Our third musketeer was looming over us. Mira. She was hiding behind thick red curls that she usually tied in a ponytail. You can talk. Kenji's expression dampened, and I noticed her smeared eyeliner. Have you been crying? Mira plonked down next to me, burying her head in her knees. My mom didn't even text me to say goodbye. She mumbled into her tights. I can understand how it must feel for her, but it's like she already thinks I'm going to hurt someone tonight. Your mom's kind of terrible. Kenji patted her on the shoulder. No offense. No, she is. Mira sniffled. She gave birth to me in this stupid town. How is it my fault that I was born here? I grabbed her hand and squeezed it. Did she not text you at all? Nope. Mira choked out a laugh. She left for work before I even woke up. I hated that part of me understood why Mira's mom chose to distance herself, but it still hurt. The three of us talked for a while about everything and nothing at all. TV shows and movies and what our thoughts were on the latest TikTok trend. Anything to take our minds off of the time, which was ticking by. I watched the sky darken outside, and the expressions on the guards at the door start to tighten. They were starting to panic. I could see it in their faces. It was around 5 to 8 when I started to get restless and my stomach was doing flip-flops. Every year, the same feeling hit me like a wave of ice water, and I always thought of Noah and what he did to my mother. It was a memory that I couldn't get away from. In past years, I had distracted myself, but I was in the eye of the storm, which was only getting closer. It was between 8 and 8:30 when the curse took effect, according to the mayor. He never gave us a specific time, so thanks for that. And I really needed to go to the bathroom. I was starting to feel sick to my stomach, my mouth watering with the looming sensation of barf creeping its way up my throat. Excusing myself from a conversation that I was only half listening to, I jumped to my feet, struggling with my cuffed hands. Pushing my way through seniors, I headed to the exit doors where a crowd of guards had all congregated. One of them had situated himself in front of me with a no-nonsense scowl. I couldn't resist glancing at the weapon attached to his belt. Bathroom, I said, when he shooed me away like I was a raccoon. I think I'm going to be sick. The guard's lips twisted. Yeah, we'll bring you a bucket, he grunted. No, I found myself saying stiffly. No, I need to go to the bathroom. I really don't want to throw up in here. I don't know if I looked pathetic enough for him to have sympathy, or if he just wanted to get rid of me, but the guard stepped aside and let me back out onto the hallway. I was surprised that no guards followed me. Thankfully, I didn't spew my guts. When I was on my way back to the auditorium, a group of people in white marched past me. I didn't think anything of it, until I saw what they were carrying with thick, gloved hands, plastic masks over their faces, metal canisters. Making sure to keep my distance, I followed them to the janitor's closet, which was pulled open. Looking at the canisters, at first I thought that it was gas, but then I caught splashes of something dripping down the side. It was clear like water but was slightly thicker and had a potent stink which seeped into my nose and throat. It was strong stuff. They were going into the sprinkler system. I knew from several years back when a junior tried to douse the cafeteria in Gatorade for a prank. When one of the people in white heaved a canister into his arms, I started to back away slowly, my heart in my throat, my brain already in overdrive. Whatever they were putting in the sprinklers was man-made, I thought, pushing myself into a stumbled run. So if that substance was what was turning kids psycho every year, did that mean that there wasn't a curse? I made it back onto the hallway and I couldn't breathe. The auditorium was right in front of me, no sign of guards, but when I slammed my fist into the door, it was locked. I pressed my face against the glass, glimpsing Kenji sitting with Mira. My gaze went to the ceiling and to the sprinklers, but it didn't make sense. Why would they do this? 18 years of lies, I thought dizzily. What were they doing to us? How did destroying their own town and killing their own people benefit them? When I found my voice, I pounded against the door. "Get out!" I screamed, tackling with a handle. It wasn't Kenji who had locked eyes with me. It was a girl that I didn't know. She looked up from her phone, her gaze meeting mine. Her hopeful smile twisted into a look of fright. I kicked the door. "Out!" I yelled, pointing at the ceiling. I twisted around, searching for guards. "Sprinklers!" "What?" She started to get up and started to call out to me, but rough arms were snaking around my waist, a clammy hand slamming a wet rag over my mouth. I opened my mouth to scream, but I was already breathing it in, that toxic stink that I had seen dripping down the side of the canister. The arms holding me tightened their grip, and my senses were drowned out by the smell seeping inside me, poisoning my lungs. But it wasn't just inside my lungs, it was in my blood, heavy in my bones and bleeding into my brain. I was aware of being yanked to my feet, but I couldn't stand. The auditorium doors were behind me, and I was being dragged back down the corridor. My body felt fake, like it wasn't even mine. I could feel it like a parasite, a virus leeching itself onto my skull. My brain was on fire. Everything was on fire. Through half-lidded eyes, I was aware of something dripping onto my face. It came slowly, splashing onto my cheeks before waves of red were hitting me. A scarlet waterfall of glistening red. It was staining me, bleeding into me before it began to rain down. It was warm and wet, drenching me, turning me into its canvas. At first, I tried to get away, but my feet were glued to the floor. But as the parasite inside my skull gained the upper hand, I stopped, trying to tear out my hair and rake my fingernails down my face. Blinking rapidly, I saw fire. I saw blurs of orange and yellow enveloping, squirming flash catching light. And I heard screams, guttural cries crying out for death. And I could feel them, all of them. All of their pain, all of their agony. 17 years of memories hitting me one by one, like bolts of lightning. I thought that was what turned us. That was what twisted us into monsters. A reminder of every other year. Every maniacal laugh. Because when I came to, I was no longer in school. The first thing I noticed through blurry vision was that I was crouched in front of a squirming figure, and above me, the sky was a colorful deluge of yellows and oranges and pinks. Sunrise. Slowly, my gaze flicked from the pretty sunrise to the figure, who slowly bled into a shadow and then a woman, whose eyes that I had plucked cleanly out. They were in my hands, squished between my fist, and my lips were split wide open like I had carved a Wonderland smile onto my own face. I could still feel the rush of adrenaline I had felt while hacking a man's head off and taking my time, scooping out each of the woman's eyes with a spoon doused in salt. I wasn't thinking about the woman begging for me to enter, and the headless torso of her husband at my feet. I wasn't thinking about my hands, the slick scarlet and the taste of rotting flesh in my mouth. I was still seeing flashes in my head, memories which weren't mine. A school bus and blurred faces around me. Someone else's thoughts were inside my head. I shook them away. All I could think about was a Littlewood's curse. As I turned around slowly and pushed myself into a run, my gaze finding the sun slowly rising over the horizon. I was halfway across the town which had been ripped apart over the last few hours. Headless bodies littered the streets. Cars had been destroyed, buildings set on fire. 2022's class had really given the other years a run for their money. I found my phone in my pocket, a text lighting up the notifications. A text sent 10 minutes ago. It was from Kenji. We need to talk now. I'm at the scrapyard, come alone. Bad people around. Kenji, I thought, swiping my bloody hands on my shirt. It wouldn't come off. My thoughts were spiraling. I needed to find him, but how? How had he texted me if the sun was only just rising? I was caked in blood, which wasn't mine and it wouldn't come off. I was painted in it. When I caught sight of Emily Carter on her knees, sobbing into what was left of her own mother, I started to wonder. For the first time in 18 years, my mind was clear. This curse, who really started it? Dearest blank, I don't want to say your name because then I'll feel the need to say so much more, and I'll end up writing far too much. Names are hard for me. You lost yours a while ago, at least in my mind. I stopped calling you blank. You were just a monster, a murderer. I know you won't read this, but I'm putting this out there anyway. I want to talk to you. I guess this is my way of apologizing. You're the first in a long list of people that I want to say goodbye to. I feel like you were the one who started this. You were the one who opened my eyes to Littlewood's curse. I've been so angry for so many years. I have felt so much pain, agony, the kind I can't even explain. It's like drowning. I've wanted to kill you so many times, often dreaming about it the older that I became. You stopped having an identity in my nightmares and became a faceless shadow suffocating my chest. I never thought that I would be writing this because you have always been a monster to me. I never thought that I would have to apologize to a monster. You and your class and every class in the past and present and future. Monsters. Even my own presently. 2022. Ironically enough, blank, we're actually the worst ones. Yeah, that's right. The class of 2022 really outdid all of you. I finally understood what it might have been like for you. I understand that craving you felt. To kill. To destroy. And that nothing would get in your way. We would kill parents, strangers, and children. Until sunrise. Until the curse was lifted and we were given back our souls, only to be hollow inside, broken. I know what it feels like to be alone and abandoned by the ones you thought that you could trust. I never knew where you had gone after you ripped our town apart, but I didn't care. I wanted you gone blank, so I didn't have to see your stupid face. But now I know the truth. And I can only wish you some kind of peace. I know it's impossible to think, even when part of me knows your fate, but I hope that you got away from there. I hope part of you is still planning to come and visit me. Lastly, I hope that you can forgive me for hating you for so long. I wish you told me. I know that I was a little kid, but you could have told me what was going to happen to you. To you, Lucy, and Poppy. If you had, maybe Mom might be here. Who am I kidding? If you didn't kill her 11 years ago, I probably would have this year. After all, it's always loved ones. Is that why you killed her, blank? Did she mean something to you? Did I? Anyway, thank you for being there when I was a kid. Thank you for making me laugh and spew milk out of my nose. Thank you for killing my mother before I did it myself, and surrendered at the last dregs of my humanity. I'll remember you, blank. Not just the flashes that I saw of you, the ones that you put inside my head. The times that mattered. Love, B. Was I having an aneurysm? Pressing my forehead against the cool brick of a crumbling wall, I reveled in the stink of burning, which was thankfully blocking out the horrific taste of skin, slithering back up my throat as I heaved at the contents of my stomach. I was used to the stink of charred human flesh. After all, the town was burning and its victims were our feast, our prizes. I chose not to look around me or take in my surroundings. I didn't want to look at a town which we had ripped apart once again. I didn't want to see bodies littering the roads and sidewalk, chunks of flesh and torsos lying in unsuspecting places. So many thoughts were alive inside my head, an endless hurricane of both nothing and everything, gliding into a vicious void that I couldn't explain, couldn't understand, couldn't stop. And yet that thought in particular was the one which reigned dominant. It had to be an aneurysm, right? I didn't feel like I had cracked my head or something had seriously gone wrong inside my brain. I was burning. I remembered Googling the term in middle school when I had a crappy headache, and my aunt had dropped the word in conversation with the doctor. What if it's an aneurysm? He had chuckled in reply. It's just a pressure headache, Miss Levi. Suffice to say, once I knew what an aneurysm was, I closed down my aunt's laptop and crawled under my bed, like I could hide from something like that. I remember reading it on WebMD, not exactly the best place to check your symptoms, but 11-year-old me wanted answers to the pounding pain, which felt like somebody slamming a rock onto the back of my head and temples. Nausea and vomiting. Yep. Felt like my insides were attempting to projectile vomit my organs. A stiff neck. Sort of. I felt stiff all over. My whole body aching like I had just been through a meat grinder. Blurred or double vision. My vision wasn't mine. I was seeing things that I shouldn't. A world which wasn't from my perspective. Sensitivity to light. The sunrise was pretty harsh on my eyes. I wasn't ready to see broad daylight and what exactly my class had done to our town. I never saw burning as a symptom. I never saw a never-ending inferno inside your brain, eating you from the inside as a symptom. I wouldn't call it an aneurysm, but it definitely was something. I don't know how to explain the immense pressure in my head, like something alive was bleeding inside my brain and latching onto me. Burning. I was burning. Everything inside me was burning and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't put this ferocious blaze out because it was inside my skull. Despite being in denial, I didn't feel like myself anymore, like my soul had been forced back inside my body, which didn't belong to me. A body which had been twisted and purged of everything she was, and turned into a monster, puppeteered by the curse. I was still running on adrenaline, a senseless and mindless craving ripping through all logic. It was still alive inside me, gritting my teeth together in a wonderland smile which I couldn't stop, which was stretched so wide across my face that my jaw felt like it was going to concave. I remembered flashes of my before I woke up, before Littlewood gave me my mind back. I had brutally killed a woman and her husband, carving their eyes out and teasing them with their last breaths with the hope of survival, only to rip away their life before that hope could blossom inside of them. It was hope suffocated by a despair which was so agonizing that it bled inside me once my eyes were open and I was staring down at my own hands, at the woman's eyeballs squished between my knuckles, while the rest of her painted me like I was her canvas. I had danced in her husband's remains, twirling to a song that only I could hear. All of that made sense. It made sense that I had been turned into a monster like the rest of my class, and it made a sick kind of sense that I had been the one to hollow out a man's body with my own hands. I had been a part of 2022's Teen Purge, a fate I knew that I couldn't and wouldn't ever escape. There were still so many questions that I wanted answering. I wanted to know why the curse was triggered by a man-made substance that we had been subjected to, and why Kenji had been able to coherently text me before sunrise. Kenji. I had to find him before he did something that he would regret. No, I thought dizzily, before he came to terms with what he had done under the influence. That thought was driving me crazy, but it was being pushed back, overwhelmed by something else entirely, which was taking over me, enveloping me. At some point, I dropped my phone and smashed the screen. I didn't know when exactly that was. Time was going so slowly. 1 minute, I had been pushing myself into a stumbled run towards Littlewood's scrapyard, motivated by Kenji's cryptic text before something inside me snapped. I had a destination, an escape which was slowly building into a coherent plan. Before, I was nothing. I was nameless, a shadow teetering between life and death, while my body and brain were burned alive. I was in my blood, my bones, my thoughts, burning. I couldn't control myself as I screamed into the air, choked with smoke. Did it come from inside my head? No. It was a fire which had been set across the road from me. My thoughts were tangled and confusing, and after a while, they weren't even mine. The longer that I burned, the longer I screamed into nothing. The physical presence which had forced its way inside my head had started to multiply. How am I supposed to describe this sensation accurately? How can I tell you this without sounding insane? It was the feeling of being drowned inside my own head, and bleeding memories entangled together, which weren't mine, creating a storm inside my head. Whispering voices fighting to make themselves heard. The unyielding force of dozens of thoughts and feelings taking over me one by one. Initially, I fought against them. I tried to push them out, because while they were seeping inside my thought process, parasites crawling into my brain, I was growing numb. My own thoughts were turning obsolete. Everything I was fading as my body became theirs. It happened slowly. I felt myself drop to the ground, still burning. The inferno in my brain and body growing brighter and brighter, numbed only slightly by my senses being snatched from me. I hit the ground, but I didn't feel the impact. Instead, the whispering grew less incoherent until there were voices, real voices screaming inside my head. Mother! A girl's cry rang inside my skull. It wasn't the cry of a child, no, it was a teenager. You don't have to do this to us. She was my age. Her wail was enough to stop my attempts at prying away the voices, and I let go. I let each of them in. I let them bleed into me until I was nothing, and they were something. The force of her rattled me until I couldn't breathe, until I couldn't force my body into a sitting position. Lying face down on singed grass with no choice but to listen to them. A sea of tangled thoughts plunging me further into the dark. A wave of ice-cold water enveloping my own sense of being. As the nameless girl took over, spiderwebbing inside of me, my senses became entangled with her. I wasn't just hearing her, I was feeling her. And within a single breath choked from my hijacked mouth, I was her. Her cry was mine, strangled and twisted, ripping from my own lips. The stranger, I could feel their writhing body pressed against something harsh digging into our back, aching arms pinned above us. The smell of smolder scratched the back of our nose, a panicked feeling turning our gut. In front of us was darkness speckled with blurred orange, shadows with no faces. The girl wasn't alone. Next to her were squirming silhouettes, and I felt a raging agony and frustration ripping her apart. She wasn't alone. Those were her thoughts, and while she was terrified of her fate, part of her felt like she could die as long as it was with them. Glimpsing a figure striding through the dark, a figure carrying a burning torch, I waited for her to talk. I waited for her to cry out, for some kind of explanation for what I was seeing. Before I could, however, the girl in her memory was being ripped away, and I heard her fighting back, trying to reach out, trying to leech back onto me. Her prying fingers failed to grasp hold, only for a second mind to find its way inside of me, harsher, more recent. The girl wasn't the only one to try and use my mouth to scream. Littlewood's high school gymnasium blossomed into mind, followed by sharp clarity. This kid was far more hesitant to reveal to me who they were. They held back a little, only choosing to show me their point of view of tipping their head back as a wave of water came down, drenching them and the rest of their class. Blood. That's what I had thought. I thought that it was blood drenching my face and clothes, gluing my hair to my head and pasting my eyes shut. It was blood that had been spilled and had already been spilled. The blood of my mother when I watched her gutted by Noah Sharp. Somehow, that colorless substance which had purposely drenched us had forced that one thought into our heads. We were covered in it. That combined with images in our heads of smoldering flame enveloping flesh and hair, an inferno setting our bodies alight. It was enough to drive even the strongest minds to pure insanity. And I was seeing it. I was seeing each experience. I was seeing the faces of loved ones driving them crazier. I felt their attempts to regain control of their mind, but the damage was already done. They slipped to their knees, their screams joining a symphony orchestra of cries around them, and saw exactly what I did. Burning, charred flesh and singed hair. Agonizing wails rattling their skulls until they were forced to join. Their hands were in their hair, gripping and pulling and tearing at their scalp. Bloody fingernails raking down their face, and a smile beginning to split their lips in half. The Wonderland smile, chasing away logical fear and pain previously grounding them in a reality that they believed in. A craving was coming alive inside of them, a hunger to rid themselves of that pain, all of that blood, by making others feel the despair which had taken an unyielding hold. It was getting harder to differentiate whose memory from who. This time they were stronger. I saw sterile flooring and running feet. Everything was blinding white. I heard his gasp for breath, a nightmarish fear eating him up from the inside, pushing him to run faster. I recognized him. Not his psychotic laughter when he had kidnapped me a year earlier, but his struggle to keep breathing, to keep sucking in oxygen which felt so far away. Just like the others before him, while his being seeped inside me, I had found myself once again plunged inside a memory. This time it was someone that I recognized, not a stranger from past years, but a classmate just below me. Tommy Nolan had an asthma attack in junior year. Second period math, he had jumped up with a panicked look on his face, clutching his chest. I remember thinking that his breathing had sounded wrong. It was like a car engine trying and failing to start. His face had been pale, trembling hands clutching at his chest. Tommy wasn't the kind of guy who would intentionally attract attention to himself. He was an introvert through and through. However, this was the type of thing that he couldn't hide away from or push people away. "I can't breathe," he had managed to gasp out, before the teacher had escorted him out of the class into the nurse's office. What I felt wasn't an asthma attack gripping his chest. It was pure panic and fear squeezing the air from his lungs, and stumbling his already clumsy steps. Tommy reached a corner and threw himself into a run which was cut short by rough hands grabbing a hold of him and yanking him back. I didn't see the rest of Tommy Nolan's memory. At least I didn't see an escape or anything which hinted at where he was. I just saw the same. A coffin-like enveloping darkness, restrained hands, raging fire. I didn't know if it was Tommy's splintered mind which had catapulted me from my own mind, or maybe he didn't want me to see everything. Before I could grasp onto his memory, he let go. The whispering voices let me go, and I found myself pressed against what grass would do, an intense pressure in my nose and crawling around the back of my head, blood pooling down my chin. I took a moment to gather myself. The sky was still half dark and half pink, pink and orange streaks taking over pooling black. Across the street, Lily Marriott was standing with the town's preacher's severed head, clumsily forced onto a makeshift pike. The man's eyes were still open, wide with horror. She wasn't moving, her scarlet hand still grasping the weapon for dear life. I got to my feet slowly, ignoring my own blood as spattered hands. I didn't think about the woman that I had murdered, or her husband. As I hopped onto a trashed bike which had been abandoned on the side of the road, it was still usable. Sure, it had bits of skin stuck in the wheels, but it would work. I pushed myself into a smooth pace which was normal. It felt normal like every other morning when Kenji and I biked to school. Instead of taking in the apocalyptic landscape around me, I focused on the road and finding my friend. That morning, I saw a mix. I saw kids who were waking up and finding themselves painted in their victims. I saw them crying, screaming. I saw one girl do the same thing to herself as she had done to her little brother. But I was also seeing kids still entangled in their own undoing, still tearing Littlewood apart. Under the last splinters of night, I saw my classmates around me. But I chose to be ignorant. I needed to find Kenji, and saving the townspeople who had been brought to the brink of despair was the last thing on my mind. Still though, I watched. I couldn't help it. There was a sort of morbid curiosity inside me once I had been freed from the curse, and then watching the rest of my class still in its iron grip. The varsity boys dragged an old man by his neck down the road, chanting the school anthem. One of them was wearing somebody's skull which had been ripped off its flesh, the remnants of a bulging eye still glued inside the socket. They wore their football jerseys, and some of them made them even more terrifying. They were the perfect depiction of Noah Sharp, Gen Z version. Littlewood's a golden boy turned psycho. 11 years later, it had taken them too. Red Hawks. Their war cries bled into the dull sunrise, stamping their feet to a beat only they could hear. The old man was struggling, his face beet red, prying wrinkly fingers attempting to tug the tough rope clinched around his limp neck. But they weren't letting go, only laughing when he let out a pained cry, begging them to stop and just let him die. Red Hawks. They ignored him, pulling his limp body across the road. I could still hear their phantom yelling when I neared the scrapyard. Passing the diner, which was nothing but a blur of vivid orange, I saw a group of girls shrieking those horrific hyena laughs, diving into the flames and dancing in the smoke, entangling themselves and licking flames. Laughter twisted into screams and cries of agony mixed with a pleasure, a euphoria that I didn't even think existed. I had felt it writhing in every soul which had bled inside me, the craving to die. When I squeezed the handlebars tighter, I felt something shift inside me once the stink of smoke had traveled into my nose, and it was choking the back of my throat. Looking down at my palms, my skin had started to catch alight. No, I wasn't seeing things. I could feel it. Flames crawling on my arms, licking across my flesh and melting through my sweater sleeve. I opened my mouth to cry out, and in the blink of an eye, I was back inside that coffin-like tunnel, drowning Tommy Nolan's memory. He didn't want me to see it. He had pulled away before I could glimpse what exactly was in there. This time, though, it wasn't Tommy Nolan strapped to a metal slab. It was me. I was closed in, suffocating on my own sobs, and curling smoke already dancing in the back of my mind. All I could see was fiery orange and red engulfing me, filling the tunnel. The thought hit me when my own body was writhing, dancing in vivid orange, getting brighter and brighter, licking across my flesh in sharp rivulets, singeing my hair from my scalp. I was in an incinerator. No, not just me. We. Tommy Nolan and the nameless girls whose screams had rattled my skull. All of us. We were in an incinerator. The shock of the vision, as well as all of our pain entwining into one, pulled me back to uncertain reality. I didn't even realize that I had let go of my bike handlebars before I was crashing down onto rough concrete, smacking my head on the curb. Stars exploded in the backs of my eyes, but the fire was gone, like it had never existed. Except I knew that it did. It had in Tommy Nolan's memory, as well as my future. An endless fire which had ripped away our flesh and sent us plunging into the dark. It made me wonder about that first memory. The girl tied to the tree in front of blurred orange. Was that how all of this had started? Did I see the first glimpses of Littlewood's curse? When I pushed the bike off me and checked my arms and legs for burns or signs of smolder, there was nothing there. Whatever had taken over my mind and crawled into my brain wasn't letting go, but I found myself hanging onto them. My head hit the ground and I stared at the sky, at red and orange clouds which almost resembled the end of the world. The sky, just like the ground below, had been set alight. Maybe it was the end of the world, I thought. Maybe Littlewood was really falling this time. I don't know how long I lay there trying to catch my breath, trying to force my maple syrup thoughts into fruition. I was trying to shake my head of a possible concussion, dislodging my brain from the puddle of fog that it had fallen into, when I heard running footsteps, bare feet slapping against gravel. I knew what this was. I had heard it as a kid. An animal-like herd of kids which had congregated into their own tribe. I had heard them running past my house every year, and each time I thought they would catch me, I thought they would crawl through my window like Noah Sharp and his friends did. But this was my class. These were the kids that I had been going to school with for years. The sounds of their whooping and laughter brought me back out of it, just a little. Twisting to the side, I glimpsed them suddenly. White canisters. The ones that I had seen in the school. The ones that I had seen being put into the sprinkler system. They were everywhere, dotted across the road, turned over on their head and leaking that same colorless substance onto the cement and into the air. I wonder if they had been purposely placed. Help me. Oh God, please help me. Just ahead of me, a woman in her 30s was sprinting. Her expression was wild with fright, dark hair flying behind her in a whirlwind. I recognized the look on her face. It was exactly what I had felt a year prior when I had escaped Tommy Nolan. The girl caught my eye for a fleeting moment, and it looked like she might have found solace in me. Her mouth opened in a silent plea, her trembling hands raising above her head, before she realized what I was. I had been so focused on looking at her face that I had failed to see the mess of startling red painting the front of her shirt. She was screaming, sobbing into the wind. There was something wrapped around her left wrist, the entrails of some poor soul's guts fashioned into makeshift restraints. Twisting around, the girl dropped to her knees and buried her head in the ground. "Don't," she screamed. "Please, don't." She wasn't running, I thought. Why wasn't she running? When the hysterical girl started to crawl across the ground, they appeared like animals, like they had been staying back, teasing her with the hope of survival. There were 8 of them, all of them carrying lead pipes. The look on their faces was feral. Blood-stained grins and empty eyes only seeing prey, only seeing another victim that they could tear apart. I started to get up, started to plan my escape, which was just to run and never stop running until I was away from them, when more war cries rang out, this time from the other side of the road. 2 separate tribes of kids advancing towards her. The second group were faster, and I recognized a face enveloped in the disgusting stain of red which had painted them. Kenji. He didn't look like Kenji anymore. I could hardly even see his face through a coating of red, smearing his cheeks and eyes, which he must have done himself. War paint, wielding a long thread of wire wrapped around his left wrist and trailing on the ground. My best friend joined the mass of kids closing in on the girl. His eyes were vacant and dark, empty of anything human. It was Noah all over again. Except this time, I wasn't a frightened 6-year-old. I could stop it. I remember getting to my feet. Movement. Several heads whipped around. I'd already caught their attention, but their gazes barely strayed on me before going back to the girl. With my attention on him, I moved towards him and taking my steps slowly. Another kid crawled out of their hiding place behind a dumpster. This time they looked younger. I didn't even want to guess how old. When half of the kids jumped the little kid while the others took care of the girl, I forced my legs to keep going, to keep moving. But I stopped when the woman dived to her feet and made a run for it, pushing herself into a sprint. I watched Kenji pursue her like a lion chasing after a deer. While their steps were stumbled and clumsy, his were calculated. I couldn't move when he dived onto her back and brought her to the ground, her face smacking against cement with a meaty smack. She squirmed, fighting to get away, but he was ready, forcing the metal wire into her mouth, wrapping it around and around until her face was turning red, and then blue, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish. The wire sliced cleanly into her, and red began to swim from her. I'll never forget which stained his hands. I knew what he was doing, squeezing tighter. He was using a garrote, and his prize was progressively more inevitable the more he forced the cutting wire through layers of skin until it met bone. Kenji! I was yelling his name before I knew what I was doing. I don't know how I got to him without breaking down, but when my face was buried in his back and I was sobbing his name, everything felt right. Even if it was just for a little while. Because, like a fairy tale narrating, the clock striking 12 and a magic spell wearing off, a dazzling sunrise broke through the clouds and the woman's gurgling had stopped, just like the jerking movements of Kenji's hands as they struggled to cut through bone. I wasn't paying attention to Kenji when he woke up. I was staring at a little girl who had walked out of her house, clutching a stuffed teddy bear, and seeing the body of her mother on the ground. A numbness started to take over me, a heavy weight on my chest. I remember his arms were suddenly around me, and they were tight, so tight, almost suffocating the breath from my lungs. Kenji's body felt strange against mine, a trembling, rattling mass as he screamed into my shoulder. I had never heard him scream before. Kenji had always hidden behind a bright smile which had finally crumbled under the curse. Did I? His words collapsed into a sob. Did I do this, B? The metal wire was still attached to him, coiled around his wrist. It marked him as a member of that tribe. No, I whispered into the damp material of his shirt. No, none of this was you. He laughed, sputtering on a sob. You're okay, I said. You're okay, just breathe. An icy shiver ripped its way down my spine when his lips found my ear. "Do you really want to outrun the asteroid?" he whispered, choking on a hysterical laugh. "Do you think that we're worthy, B?" His tone darkened. "Is our suffering worthy?" Kenji was hysterical and clinging onto me. I was still thinking about his words when footsteps had startled me. Kenji's phone hit the ground, followed by the curve of a heel splintering the screen. When I looked up, Miss Hawkins, our drama teacher, was looming over us holding a gun. It didn't look like the usual gun that I saw my neighbors use on wildlife. This one had a red-colored butt and fit perfectly into her hand. She shot Kenji first. The bullet hit his arm and he dropped to the ground. Miss Hawkins kicked Kenji onto his side, and I caught sight of a tiny dart-like needle sticking from below his elbow. When her gun zeroed in on me, I almost wished that it was a real one. I remember her pulling the trigger, but it wasn't just aimed at me. It was aimed at every other soul which had entangled itself with me. This had happened to every year prior to us, and I had a sickening feeling that I knew what was coming next. I woke to a nauseating feeling of movement to find my head uncomfortably pressed against the bus window. Outside, a long stretch of dead road leading to nowhere. There were no signs and no civilization. Nothing. It took me a disorienting moment to figure out that I was on a school bus. The same bus that I had seen in thousands of other memories. Next to me, Kenji poked me in the shoulder. He was awake and seemed with it enough to talk, though there was a strange smile in his face which was twisting my gut. I turned around to face him and blinked rapidly, because my friend's face morphed and blurred, twisting into hundreds of others. First, girls and boys in strange clothing like they were from the Dark Ages, and the distant sound of horseback, a carriage being dragged. I could smell wildflowers mixed with the stink of rot and excrement, hear the sound of birds in chains rattling around jiggling wrists. And then I was seeing strangers, each of them bearing clothes from different eras. I saw Tommy Nolan, and then Chrissy Lackey, Robin Chase, faces from previous years, all blood-splattered, all wide-eyed, a haunting, hollow look on their faces. Until Noah. Until I saw his face twisted with anger and pain and frustration. His hands went to his hair in a silent cry, and he was slamming bloodied fists into his temples, over and over again. "Get me off this bus. I don't want to be here. I want to go home. I want to go back." Hey, calm down." The voice was Poppy. Her shriek echoed in my brain, as the bus they were on collapsed into panic, and Noah was diving from his seat before being grabbed and restrained by guards and shoved back next to Poppy. I felt her gentle hand on his shoulder. Poppy's arms were around him, and Noah was relaxing into her embrace. "We'll go into the halfway house, Noah." Her soothing murmur inside my head was cut short when I sensed the coffin-like tunnel once again. Flames. Getting closer and closer, and his screams, ringing so loud on my head, horrifying wails of agony cracking my skull open. I felt my own clammy palms press against my ears, the force of his cry becoming my own. B. I was sweating and shaking, choking on still vomit in my mouth, when Kenji waved a wary hand in front of my face and I found reality once again. When my gaze found his, Kenji had that smile again. He sat back with a sigh, pressing his head against the seat. "You got it, huh?" he chuckled. "I wish I did." I found my breath, swallowing whatever the heck I had eaten in the last 12 hours. "Got what?" he shrugged. "Do you remember when I asked you if you would give your life to destroy an asteroid?" I had to think back to that conversation, which didn't seem relevant until now. "Kenji." He cut me off, his smile fading a little. I really did want to see my dad, he whispered. As he spoke, I found my gaze wandering and finding our classmates, who were either asleep or staring into the oblivion only they could see. And Kenji sighed. I imagined all of these scenarios in my head, that we would all come to the halfway house and heal and get better like all the other kids before us, and I would jump on a plane and go and visit my dad in Hokkaido. I noticed his hands were trembling in his lap. But I'm an idiot and I'm naive. He turned to me. We're just kids, right? What do we know? I was losing my patience with his cryptic words. What are you talking about? I was kidnapped like you, he said through a sigh. Last year, the night of the teen purge, I forgot to close our gate, so I rushed to lock it up before I brought attention to our house. But I was too late. They were waiting for me outside. They knocked me out with the bat and I woke up on the roof of the school. He dug his hands in his lap, choking out a hiss. I was the only one left, B. When I woke up, I was staring at people that she had pushed to their desks. My hands were tied behind my back so I couldn't move, or try to get away in this girl. He trailed off, his gaze going to a stray raindrop on the window. This girl was dangling me over the edge, like I was bait over a shark tank. I was freezing and I was only in my pajamas, and I remember wondering if I was actually going to die. The bus went over a bump and I grabbed onto his hand, squeezing it as tight as I could. I waited for it, Kenji whispered. I waited for her to kill me, but she wrenched me back, and her eyes were pitch black and hollow. His eyes filled with tears. She was smiling like it would thrill her to watch me fall like the ones before me, and she would have no mercy. As if his words were a narration, I was seeing the vision for myself, like somewhere inside my head, the girl that lingered. I could see it. I could see pooling darkness a long way down. Kenji, his arm tied behind his back, a single strip of duct tape over his mouth, while arms were wrapped around his waist, dangling him teasingly as he twisted and struggled in her arms, like I was seeing it through her POV. I glimpsed tangled blonde curls in front of my face, a carving knife, a slick red, clenched in my fist. She held him tight, squeezing the breath from him. It's a long way down, huh? Her voice was a cackle clanging in my skull. I could see his wide eyes, petrified as she pushed him closer and closer to the edge. Kenji continued in a low murmur. But this girl didn't push me. She didn't kill me. Instead, she just pulled me close. I could smell her rotting breath. But through all the black, whatever had possessed her, I could see that there was still something there. It was weak but still alive. Before I knew it, I was on my knees and she was in front of me, like she could see right through me, like she could reach into my head and pull out every memory that I had ever had. His voice trembled. She asked me a question, and I'll never forget it, B, because it was what changed my way of thinking. Instead of being scared to die, I felt like I could finally embrace it. His words sent my gut galloping into my throat. I saw it. I saw her yanking him back onto his knees and pulling him close. What? I whispered, shaking away the vision. The girl was insistent on shoving her memory onto me. Kenji's eyes found mine, and for the first time in the 17 years of the teen purge, I saw the Wonderland smile in broad daylight. I saw insanity brewing in eyes which had been darkened far before Littlewood's curse that had snatched his mind. It had been hours since the curse had let us go, and there it was, splitting my best friend's mouth apart into a Cheshire cat grin. It was exactly what I had seen in Noah Sharp's face before. He had sliced my mother open and gutted her. But while Noah's expression had been a blank slate, a monster, I only saw tragic hope lighting up my best friend's eyes. But it wasn't real hope. Real hope was wanting to survive. It was forcing yourself to keep going no matter what. What I saw was that craving that I had felt when I had woken up covered in blood, the one emitting from every voice inside my head. The overwhelming pleasure which came with the thought of dying, giving yourself up. She asked me if I wanted to save the world. He said, his eyes twinkling. How cool is that? I was losing him. Oh, what did you say? I asked. He smiled. I said yes. What else could I say? She got this weird look on her face, this smile, which was both maniacal and yet unbelievably sad. It made me feel like I would feel it too. I don't think that I'll ever forget it. Kenji turned towards the window, and this time, like he was refusing to admit it to my face. She told me that I will, just like her and the kids before her. That's what the siren inside her head said. At that point, I had hoped I'd be able to save the world, and then visit my dad. I really thought it was as easy as that. His lips twisted, eyes lighting up. But then I understood what she meant. I finally understood, and I wasn't scared anymore. How could I fear my own fate? She didn't mean me saving the world, B. She meant me and you, all of us in the past and present and future, giving our lives for 7 billion others. He turned to me with almost cartoon-like eyes. You can hear them, he murmured. The girl had that exact same look in her eyes. Swallowing hard, I fought to breathe. What do you even mean? Haunted, Kenji said. They're telling you exactly what happened to them, and you can't stop it. You want to pull them out of your head, but you can't. They're like a parasite that's taking over. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Can you tell me? His voice was small. How does this end? How do we save the world? Lying on a metal slab and staring at pooling black-white flames lit across my flesh and set my hair alight, my body smoldering, burning bright. That was how it was going to end. Like Noah and every year before us, we were going to burn. And it made sense, right? Why wouldn't a town permanently get rid of their youth tainted by a curse? But it still felt like I was missing something, and that something was getting closer as we approached the halfway house. B, Kenji murmured, are you okay? Instead of responding, I pressed my face into his shoulder and sobbed until my eyes were raw, until my chest was heaving. Outside, a fall was taking over nature, and for the first time in a while, I took a moment to take it in, breathing in the smell of wet mildew and crushed leaves, drifting through the window and marveling beautiful decay. It's crazy how much you start to notice about the world around you when you know your time is running out. I don't think that I'll ever look at a tree the same again. In my cotton candy thoughts, still half asleep from the tranquilizer though, I was slowly conducting a plan to get the heck out of there. I refused to burn. When the bus came to an abrupt stop suddenly, I pressed my head against the window and peered out, hyper alert of my surroundings. I was seeing a large glass building which reminded me of a school or maybe a hospital. It looked far more modern than anything in Littlewood. It hit me that this was the halfway house that we had been promised solace ever since we were kids. I vaguely remembered our class being told about the curse and quickly following that up with, but we'll keep you safe like we do every year. We send our seniors to a place of healing to prepare them for the outside world after going through such trauma where they can mend. When in actuality, I knew exactly what it was. The whispering in my head had revealed the halfway house's true meaning. Inside that building, we were going to burn. We were going to burn and nobody was coming to save us. Not our parents or the town. Leaning back in my chair, my gaze flicked to the front where 2 armed guards were beginning to escort my classmates off the bus. I'd already made my decision when I grabbed Kenji's sleeve and yanked him under the seat in front of us. He let out a sharp gasp, almost a sound of protest. B, what are you? Slamming my hand over his mouth, I pressed myself into a ball, pulling him further under the seat. The thud-thud-thud of the guard's boots sent slithers of fear creeping up and down my spine. They passed us. I could hear their breathing, their muttering to each other. The guards already knew our game. I sensed them checking under each seat, which motivated me to shuffle myself further under until I couldn't breathe. Kenji didn't move, his breathing sharp and heavy into the flesh of my palm. After a moment which seemed to go on forever, thudding boots retreated back towards the front of the bus. I squeezed my eyes shut when the engine started up once again, and the bus jolted, almost throwing us violently from our hiding place. Once the bus started to move, keeping a firm grip on Kenji's sleeve, I pulled us from our hiding place and lifted my head, scanning for somewhere better. The back was our best bet. When I started towards it, dragging Kenji with me, however, I spotted two familiar faces already in hiding, Jonas and Mira. Without speaking, we joined them. It was an uncomfortable squeeze, but we were safe. I allowed myself to breathe when the bus fell into a steady drive, but I didn't have time to relax. I was considering asking Jonas in low whispers why he had chosen to hide, when once again the bus came to a jolting stop. 47. The bus driver all but squeaked from the front. I had never heard a grown man's voice go that high, but the driver had managed it. Crap. Shooting the others a panicked look, I weighed our options. 3 against 1, we could easily get past them. No, we did a sweep of the bus. There's nobody out here. Jonas twisted around, shooting me a questioning look. What the heck is wrong with him? He mouthed. The bus driver's voice was eerily shaky. I could hear every tremble in his tone. Check, yes, I'll check now. When the driver started down the aisle in a bumbling stumble, ducking under each seat, I attempted to hide. I mean, there was nowhere to hide, though I at least tried to shove myself uncomfortably further under the seat until we were sardines. Hey! The driver's steps quickened towards us and I felt my body catapult into fight or flight. What are you kids still doing here? I lifted my head to meet his eyes, expecting anger. But there was no anger, however. I was seeing frustration and fear, trickles of pain blooming in wide, cartoon-like eyes. The guy was keeping his distance from us, I noticed, like we were teeming with the plague. It was a curse, not a contagious virus. Jonas jumped to his feet and raised his arms in mocking surrender. His smile was bright, but there was an underlying darkness in his eyes, and I had no doubt that he wouldn't resort to violence. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the whole halfway house thing, he said. I'd rather just ride back into town and go see my pops. His lip curled. I need to see if he's okay, man. No. The driver's eyes filled with tears. No. He shook his head rapidly, his arms trembling at his sides. No, you're not. Cocking a brow, Jonas frowned. The curse is over, idiot, he scoffed. Are you crying? Jonas! Mira's hiss was a warning. Shut up. I chose to stand at that point, and Kenji followed. The driver stiffened, backing away. Stay back, he hissed out. Do you hear me? His shaky hand went into his jacket, his eyes squeezing shut like he was expecting something. I'm taking you kids back to the halfway house, okay? He nodded at us like we would agree if he looked as pathetic as possible, and he did. The guy looked like he was ready to drop to his knees and beg. Just stay there, the driver hissed out. I caught the exact moment that he had dropped the notion of an authority figure. His lips twisted, when Jonas ignored his instructions and took a casual step towards them. If this guy had a gun, I knew that he would use it. But instead, he stumbled back with a cry. Don't you move, I mean it. Jonas smirked. Oh, like this. Another step. This time, the man let out a shriek. Jonas, Kenji said. Dude, stop. Why? Jonas twisted around to look at him. This guy's got problems. I caught a glimmer of that maniacal glitter left over from overnight. Let me guess, Jonas laughed. You see dead people. In 3 strides, he was face to face with the guy, nose to nose. This time the driver didn't move. He was petrified to the spot, breathing hard, his mouth twisting and turning and trying to speak. But he couldn't. Jonas inclined his head and I could feel something building in my head, a pressure harsh enough to make my nose bleed. I found myself staring out of the window and outside. I noticed the patch of flowers which had been planted outside the halfway house. They were drooping. No, not just drooping. They were blackening and rotting away into their soil, petals being whisked into a spiraling breeze and coming apart. Kenji started forward and grabbed Jonas's wrist, and with the 2 of them so close, the man let out a childish whine which only delighted Jonas further. Outside a tree that I had been sure had been standing tall and proud, it crashed onto the ground. The pressure was building in my brain and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Hey, Jonas yelled in his face. What did I say, huh? The curse is over. You don't have to be scared of us anymore, so how about you? It sounded like a mere pop, like bursting bubblegum. I didn't hear the latter half of what he had said because the bus windows were suddenly bright red and dripping red. The floor was red, the seats and the ceiling. Jonas was red and I could feel splatters of it on my cheeks and speckled on my chin. The others had gotten the worst of it, but it was still painting me. The red was warm and wet like I had bathed in it. It was at my feet, pooling and spilling and splattering every color from existence. There was a dizzying moment when I thought it was raining blood before my brain found reality, and I blinked at the spot where the driver had stood in front of us, and it began to dawn on me. I hadn't been looking at the man when he had popped out of existence. I was watching the leaves on the tree outside start to brown and then blacken into nothing. Jonas, who looked like he was starring in some scary movie, twisted around to face me with wide, almost unseeing eyes. He looked like he might say something before the bus shook, and I forced myself to move to find the window. Kenji let out a hiss and I swallowed barf. Outside, the ground had started to crack apart, zigzagging raptures spreading like fire across the sidewalk. Kenji grabbed my arm and pulled me off the bus, Jonas diving off first and Mira on his heel. The world was crumbling around us, I realized. I could see it in flocks of birds flying across the sky in a panic. When we found solid ground, Jonas spoke. I was half listening to him, eyeing the growing sinkhole eating up everything in front of us. A woman jumped into her car and attempted to drive straight ahead, before a tree collapsed, crushing her car. This is the curse, Jonas said shakily. The 4 of us teetered on a safe piece of sidewalk. It's got to be, right? Mira wasn't speaking. I think she was frozen, traumatized. I could barely see through her red. Nope, Kenji murmured. He swiped blood from his eyes with his sleeve. It's because we're refusing to save the world. What? Jonas spluttered. The ground started to split in front of me and I staggered back, my stomach galloping into my throat. He's brainwashed, I found myself greeting out. Kenji really thinks that we're saving the world. Like the Avengers. Jonas grabbed his arm with a laugh. Dude, did you hit your head? Have you ever heard a human being explode? It kind of sounds like a pop. Like I said, it was just like bubblegum. I glimpsed a running man hand in hand with a little kid before both of them went pop against the store window, painting it a whole new color. Like a domino effect, townspeople started rupturing like the ground beneath us, and neither of us moved. I think we were too scared. I think even I wondered if we were too going to join them in the sea of red. I was staring at an old woman struggling to hobble through a panicking crowd when the mayor had announced himself via the megaphone across a particularly large crack. Armed guards surrounded him and I wondered if whatever this was would spare him. Stay exactly where you are, he yelled. Do you understand me? Do not move. When they risked coming closer, Part of me reveled in seeing fear prickle in their eyes. Behind the mayor was our principal. His face beat red. The guy was seething. "Can you kids even comprehend what you've done?" Yeah. I think we accidentally caused the death of Littlewood." I didn't say that though. I wanted answers, and Kenji and Jonas seemed in their own world, watching our town crumble around us. "The curse," I said shakily when they were close enough to hear us. Another tree behind us hit the ground, but it barely fazed me, and neither did the little girl screaming for her mother exploding, showering the scruffy German shepherd that she was pulling in red. I had almost been desensitized to what I was seeing. It was all one big blur, like I was dreaming. "Who really started it?" The mayor dropped his megaphone. "If I tell you, will you hand yourselves over?" Even his voice was shaking. I nodded. "Of course." His lips twisted. "No fighting, no more questions." "Sure," I said, gesturing to the world around us. You should hurry up though, unless you want to be brain soup." "Huh?" Jonas nudged me. "B, are you serious?" "Oh, very," I said. "I want to know why you made Noah Sharp kill my mother 11 years ago." The mayor looked like he might argue or even attempt to capture us right there and then, but he didn't give the order. Instead, he pasted on a strict smile. 200 years ago in the year 1799, the elders of this town made a grave mistake." He cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Littlewood was on the brink of collapse. Women were unfortunately barren, and nothing they tried would work. We had no other option, and we were forced to make a terrible choice. Our elders prayed to a certain entity and asked for good luck and prosperity. "Prayed?" Kenji frowned. The mayor was doing a good job of skirting around the real conversation. "A certain number of young people in the town were burned at the stake as a gift to these certain entities in control of the town." He folded his arms. "However, what they did not know is that these people were impure. They had engaged in certain activities which would be deemed..." "They screwed." Jonas cut him off. "We get it." I could see the realization starting to light up in his eyes. The mayor's gaze found the ground. "Indeed," he said. "This act angered these entities the townspeople attempted to appease, so a deal was struck to avoid backlash, which they knew was coming when their food began to rot. Their animals mysteriously died, and rumors of a beast in the woods began to circulate." I hated that the guy chose to avoid eye contact when explaining why we were being punished for something which we had nothing to do with. So, every year following until the end of time, the 18-year-olds of Littlewood would be sacrificed as Littlewood's punishment. If a debt wasn't paid, however, the entities promised a wrath on Earth that would strike our town, closely followed by the world. This time, he lifted his gaze and looked me directly in the eye like I was supposed to feel guilty. Our town would fall and destruction would spread across the world, starting in neighboring towns and spreading from state to state, and then cities and countries far across the world, killing billions. He took a deep breath. Men, women, and children, newborns, all would perish under their fury. "What does that have to do with turning us into psychopaths then?" Jonas asked. Gone was the fight, all of his resolve. He had backed away like a cornered animal. This time, the man had the slightest of smiles. "Do you think parents would agree to us murdering their children if we didn't make them fear them? If we didn't plant the idea in their head that it was their twisted child's life or the innocent townspeople?" Forget that." Jonas scoffed a laugh when Mira dropped her knees and sobbed into the ground. "You expect me to die for an already dying town?" "Mr. Lockhart, the sole reason why this town is crumbling around us is because you are still breathing," the mayor said. "Right now, 47 seniors have been gifted as a part of our yearly ritual. That is not enough to stop them from destroying us. We need exactly 50 gifts." "I don't care." He backed away, grabbing Kenji's hand, but Kenji wrenched away from his grasp and strode over to the guards with eyes which weren't scared. "The girl who told me she had a siren in her head," he said softly. "She said that I was going to save billions of lives." There was a dreamy smile on his face as I realized with a pang in my chest that I preferred it to the agony twisting his expression when I had found him. I wanted him to be happy, to be at peace, but not like this. I wanted to run away with him, with Jonas and Mira, even if this twisted fate demanded otherwise. Kenji strode over to the guards and 2 out of 4 spontaneously combusted in their helmets, before the remainder grabbed and restrained him. For a moment, Jonas looked like he might join him. I saw it in his expression, in his eyes filling with tears. He took a shaky step forward like he would abandon self-preservation for a boy that he had confusing feelings for. A boy who was locked in a fantasy that nobody could pull him out of. Before he turned on his heel and ran, I watched him go, concrete splintering under every clumsy step. I respected that Jonas had chosen himself over the town, his own life over 7 billion. He didn't owe Littlewood anything. No amount of persuasion would change that. "Crap," the mayor hissed out, a look of panic twisting his expression. "Go after him, we need 50 sacrifices." The guards hesitated. "Go." He nodded to Kenji. "Take him to the halfway house, they're waiting for him." At his words, I found myself backing away, and an almost childlike look of pain crossed his face. "B." He stamped the ground like a child, like he was having a tantrum. "Did you not hear him?" He shook Kenji like a doll, his smile widening. "You're going to save the world." "No." I laughed at him, red in his face. He had to be kidding. He had taken away my mom and Noah and now Kenji, my entire class, to make up for a mistake that they had made. We were being punished for what they had done. For 200 years we had suffered because of them, and he expected me to give myself up. One look at Kenji told me that he would never follow me. He had already made his choice, but still though, I smiled at him, and he smiled back. Not a Wonderland smile, but a real smile. "You're insane," I found myself spluttering. "You want to die." Kenji rolled his eyes. "Die," he said. "Who wants to die? No, B, I don't want to die." My friend laughed and the guard holding him flinched, as if a single movement or expression would trigger him to combust like the others. "What did I tell you? I want to go visit my dad before Christmas. I want to move across the country and start fresh in a new college. I want to." He pulled a face. "I want to eat New York pizza and kiss a stranger, make mistakes that I learned from. Maybe I want to go skinny dipping in mid-December, drive through late-night traffic with my head stuck out of the window, singing to some cheesy pop song. Barf all over myself after too much drinking, and then do it all over again the next night because I have zero self-control." The more that he was speaking, the more I realized that I was losing him. No, I had lost him. Kenji was speaking in goodbye, and there was nothing that I could do to stop him. Because if he made his choice to give in to his fate, then what business did I have trying to save him? He would only hate me. He was doing a bad job of acting like goodbye didn't matter to him though. And the list goes on. "Of course I want to live, idiot," he laughed. "Nobody ever wants to die, even on the edge of life, even with that storm cloud over their head, the suffocating pressure in their chest. All of that anxiety and pain knotting up their gut telling them that they're not worth it, that they should give up. They all still want to live. They want that reason to keep going." I knew exactly what he was talking about. Why I couldn't step in front of the traffic or do stuff to myself. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe not all of Kenji was gone. His eyes were far too sad for me to call them empty, brainwashed. But he stumbled over his words. "How is it fair that I live while everyone else dies? Isn't that selfish? How could I stay breathing knowing that every year before had sacrificed themselves?" "They didn't have a choice," I said through gritted teeth. Do you really think they willingly walked into the flames? Kenji held my gaze. It's not painful, B, you should know that. They're in your head. What was he talking about? It was painful. I had felt everything they had. And then came the waterworks. Kenji, see you around, B. He didn't even flinch when the guard holding him exploded, and another one grabbed onto him with quaking hands. Another grabbed Amira, and she seemed to be frozen. Let go of me. When one of them awkwardly strode towards me, I felt myself moving, backing away. One last look at Kenji. He was still smiling, and knowing that he was happy, he was at peace with his fate. I ran. It's been 11 days since I last saw him, since he became the 47th sacrifice. October 3rd, the trees started to blossom again. Outside my hiding place, the remnants of the diner, a rose bush blossomed out of nowhere. Amongst the chaos and the endless shower of red every time another townsperson was claimed, there it was, life, sitting in a battlefield of death. Kenji, number 47. I lit a candle for him. While I couldn't find any candles, so I set my neighbor's yard alight instead. October 5th, the ground stopped cracking apart and the townspeople stopped exploding. I think I know what happened. It was fast. Every living thing that was rotting away until nature was blossoming instead, until buildings stopped crumbling. The giant sinkhole in the town center closed up. It was such a drastic turn that I knew another one of us must have given themselves to the town. And with the way the wind blew, almost knocking me off my bike when I was scoping out the ruins of the town, I knew that it was Jonas. Idiot. Jonas had followed Kenji. He should have ran. Maybe there might be far more destruction if he did. As soon as this town started to mend itself, I knew that it was him giving himself up and totaling the number of sacrifices to 48. I wondered if it was enough to make Kenji's wish come true. Did my fallen classmates really save the world? Following them was Mira. I knew by the pace the leaves started to flower in the trees that she had fought until her last breath. Birds started to sing again, and the last person who exploded was ironically her mother. It sucks to be her. I think I'm allowed to laugh in this situation, right? And I did. I laughed until I cried. Until the remaining townspeople power washed her off the sidewalk with everyone else. October 11th, and the sun is shining. The townspeople attempt to rebuild a broken town, and I sit here sipping a strawberry smoothie and hoping me sitting here and breathing will still bring their downfall. I don't have to hide anymore. Nobody will come near me. I'm like a plague. I'm skipping town soon, but first, I want to stay behind to see the fireworks. I want to know if Littlewood has truly been spared, or if they're just taking their time. I like to think my classmates are still here. I mean, they are. I see them in spring flowers coming to life in fall. I hear them in the wind blowing my hair back. Some call me a coward for running away, while others beg me to keep going. And I will. I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for Littlewood to fall, because I am the 50th sacrifice. While I breathe, their debt is not paid. My town's clock is ticking, and I can't wait for a wrath to finally be bestowed on the ignorant. I know this entity is waiting for the 50th sacrifice. I don't think anyone could ignore the dead birds covering the street and that rotting odor in the air. And I'll be here sipping a smoothie and awaiting the end times. Who knows, maybe they're right around the corner. I'm going to ask you that same question again. If this was your choice, what would you do? Would you surrender yourself to a fate which will save billions of lives? Or run? I chose to run. I can see him now, standing across the road towards my living room window. He stands approximately 4 feet and 7 inches tall from what I can tell. The average for a boy his age. My estimate for that is he is either 9 or 10, but I have no way of knowing for sure. This is because of his costume, if you can really call it that. It's a draped bedsheet, tattered and messy on the edges with splintering tears and unevenly cut holes across his face and upper chest. In some ways, it reminds me of a caricature representation of an old Peanut special, and for this reason, I have come to call the boy Charlie. Charlie and I have made an unspoken agreement over these past 3 years. I do not bother him, and he never bothers me. This is because of what happened that very first Halloween after I moved in. I never intended to be up so late, but my friend Matt invited me to a party, and Matt was the type you simply couldn't say no to. I left my house around 9:30 that night, the usual crowd of trick-or-treaters already having made their way by, and that was when I noticed him in my rearview mirror. He was holding an empty plastic jack-o'-lantern and staring straight at me as I prepared to back out. I remember feeling startled. It was unusual to see anyone out at this time of night, let alone a child. So I put my car in park and jumped out to scold him. "What do you think you're doing? Your parents must be worried sick. What's your name?" I asked as I wagged my finger at him from across the street. The boy said nothing. He simply continued to stand there, clutching his plastic candy carrier and looking toward me. I remember that made me feel even more uncomfortable, but also a little frustrated. "Don't ignore me, young man. I'm talking to you," I shouted as I crossed over to get a better look at him. I reached down and grabbed his arm and pulled him over to my driveway. My plan was to call his parents, get them to discipline him, and possibly give him a heart-to-heart. None of that happened. Instead, the moment that I touched Charlie, I could not move. I don't mean to say that he was strong or that he had pulled away from me. What I'm describing is utter and total loss of any bodily function. I was paralyzed, frozen. I released my grip from the boy immediately and stared down at my sweaty palm. I felt dizzy, confused, and out of breath as I took a few steps back. At first, I thought it was a mistake of some kind, maybe a prank. Could it be that the boy was carrying rocks in his shoes and couldn't move? I got closer to inspect his clothing. In the dim light of the street lamps, I couldn't make out much, so I chose to crouch down. He was wearing long Levi denim jeans under the bedsheet, which ended in some mess of mud and stains on his bare ankles. But no socks nor any shoes, just naked feet which seemed to be covered in dirt and grime. Getting back up to my feet, I placed my hands on my hips and tried again to intimidate him. "What's your name, son?" He made no reply at all. "Look, if you don't cooperate with me, I'm going to have to call the police, and that's that," I said firmly. The air was still. It didn't seem like my words meant much of anything to him. Just to show I was making good on my threat, I whipped out my smartphone. The way he just continued to gaze as I unlocked it and showed I was getting ready to dial made me nervous. "I'm not bluffing," I told him. Again, not even a whimper of frustration from the boy. I dialed. Not because I felt that I needed to make him comply, but mostly out of concern. Something wasn't right here, and the authorities needed to be notified. I went back to my car to grab my purse after talking to a police officer, and then messaged Matt to tell him that I would be running late. After about 10 excruciating minutes of the boy staring at me, I spotted the police cruiser at the end of the street. Gently, they pulled up to my curb and rolled down the driver's side window. A young officer nodded towards me and asked, "What seems to be the problem, miss?" I almost laughed. "The problem is this kid. He's been out here for almost an hour now. It's not normal." The officer looked at his partner, and then both of them stared over at the boy. For a long moment, neither of them said anything either. "Nothing to be concerned about, ma'am. Go about your business," the first cop finally said. I think my jaw actually dropped. "What do you mean there's nothing to be concerned with? He needs help. Isn't there a loitering ordinance you should enforce, or a curfew?" I insisted. "Curfew is 10:30, ma'am, and only on school nights. He ain't hurting nobody," the second officer declared. They offered me a card to call back if there was any other issue and drove off nonchalantly. I looked up toward the trick-or-treater in frustration and marched back over to him. "This isn't funny anymore," I said, but my voice no longer had any sort of commanding tone to it. It was quivering and anxious. I didn't want to even touch him again, but I forced myself to do so. The same electrifying sensation flowed across my body. It felt like time itself was standing still. I couldn't tell you how long I was there just holding his arm. But after what seemed like an eternity, I finally heard him speak. It wasn't out loud though. This was like a deep resignation into the farthest crevices of my mind. "Walk away," it said firmly. It was a cold voice, not the voice of a child, not even really a human. No, this is the type of voice I think the devil must have, perhaps something even far older. It was old, ancient, and evil, and it made every fiber of my being feel a sense of hopelessness, emptiness. I let go of him and rushed back to my car. I couldn't get over the fact that this felt very, very wrong. So I called Matt up and begged him to come to my house, to do something to make this kid leave. It was an hour before he got there. I don't remember much about that hour other than a sensation of dread slowly creeping through my body. I didn't feel safe anywhere. I thought about going inside, locking the door and waiting for Matt. But it felt strange to hide from a child. It felt even stranger to be standing there, only 10 feet from him, and realizing I felt powerless. Was this even a child? Or was this something much older, much stronger, and far more deadly? These thoughts circled my mind like bloodthirsty sharks in a pool. I no longer felt comfortable talking to the boy, nor did I want to make eye contact. I just wanted him to leave. Matt got there right around 11. His face was a mixture of concern and frustration. "I really thought you were joking," he told me as he got out of his sports car and walked toward the boy. "So, what's going on, champ?" he asked, smiling at my visitor. The trick-or-treater, as expected, said nothing. "Come on, bud, let's go home," Matt decided and prepared to tug on his arm. I knew what was going to happen, but it still felt like I was watching a train wreck in slow motion. Matt instantly became rigid, the way a person might if he were to be encased in cement. His face looked pale and full of shock, his hair standing on its end. And then he jerked back and nearly stumbled into the road, his features the look of death. Matt got up, brushed his pants off, and started walking towards his car. "I don't need to be here. You don't need me, just leave the kid alone," he said. He started his engine, and I gripped the side of his car door. "Where are you going?" I asked. He stared at me with a frantic look in his eyes and repeated his warning. He sounded out each word slowly and purposefully. "Leave the kid alone." And then he drove off. When it was just me alone with the trick-or-treater again, that sick churn in my stomach returned. I finally convinced myself to go inside. I remember staying in the living room though, peeking out the windows and waiting for something to happen. I remained fixated on the boy, my eyes drooping and my weariness overwhelming me. Finally, sleep overcame me. The next morning, the boy was gone. No trace of him even remained. Not even the dirt that I had seen surrounding him on the sidewalk. It was as if he was never there. I tried to call Matt to get his viewpoint on the whole ordeal, but he didn't pick up. A drive to his apartment revealed that he was gone. His roommate hadn't heard from him. A few short hours later, I found out that no one had. He, like the trick-or-treater, had vanished. I went down to file a police report the day after. Something told me that it was important I do it for the boy too. But nothing ever came of it. Somehow I found a way to return to normal life. I forced myself to, really. It almost worked. I was almost free. Until the next year, when the boy returned. When I saw him appear this time, there was no doubt. I knew I was dealing with a specter of some kind. That only made my anxiety worse, and for the whole night, I couldn't leave my house. I was certain that if I did, something would go wrong. He would cause something to go wrong. Somewhere after midnight, I tried to get a grip of my sanity and become courageous. Maybe it was the drinks I had to calm my nerves. Either way, I convinced myself that I could go confront this apparition and make them leave. I approached with a drunken swagger, nervous and fidgety. The boy didn't seem to care, so I knelt down to get on his eye level, searching for any signs of his eyes or facial features. In the streetlights, I could see nothing, not even the reflection from his pupils. It's possible that he may not even have them. I imagined staring into the faceless boy, and it made me shake physically. I lost my courage then and went home to sob in bed. I dared not try again that night. Experiencing something like this not once but twice, it makes you reevaluate things in your life, reconsider what is and isn't important. I've never really thought about having kids, not even as a little girl. My mother raised me and my two siblings alone, and I guess I always equated children as being a hardship more than a blessing. Over the course of the next year, however, as the months crept by, I found myself thinking often of the boy. The one that I now had come to call Charlie. What was his story? Was he a ghost, and if so, why? My mind conjured up a narrative that involved abusive, negligent parents. The kind that didn't have time to take their son trick-or-treating, and dismissed the practice as being something better suited for a boy half his age. In dreams, I would see Charlie becoming angry and storm off to bed, shouting to his parents that he hated them. And then, when he knew that they were asleep in their beds, slowly, he would make his way out the back door. Having no money for a costume, nor parents that cared to craft him one, Charlie did the deed himself. He took an old bedsheet and a rusty pair of scissors and headed off into the night, with likely only a pocket full of change to purchase a plastic jack-o'-lantern. From there, the dreams are murky. Something happened to him, but I don't know what. Was he struck by a car, taken? I didn't know. But this year, I've decided that I want to find out. Yes, I'm breaking our agreement. Likely you will believe this is because of some curiosity, and you are likely right. I've begun to believe that Charlie is my responsibility somehow. I expect one of two things will likely occur. Neither is exactly pleasant. The first scenario involves me attempting to talk to the spirit that I believe is holding Charlie hostage, the ancient dark force that has chosen to have him appear on my street every Halloween. I don't really know if such a being can be reasoned with, or if it even understands human concepts, but I will show that I have some form of empathy and understanding for Charlie. I will tell the spirit that I want to help. I will even offer to take his place, so that Charlie may go free back to his family. This way, at least these spirits will feel they are getting something out of the deal. But again, I cannot say with any degree of certainty that this will work, which is why I'm leaning more towards my second option. This involves talking to Charlie directly and apologizing to him. It won't be easy. Going near to him still makes me nervous and queasy. The aura surrounding him is strong. But I want him to know what has happened is not his fault. I don't blame him for any sort of mental anguish he has caused me, nor do I hold him accountable for what happened to Matt. He's a child. He is innocent in this. All I want is for him to know that it'll be okay. It might be a lie, seeing as I don't know what the outcome will be. I believe it'll go one of two ways based on these methods. Either the creature will see reason and allow Charlie to return to his world or pass on to the next, or he will continue to hold on to Charlie as his prisoner. There is only one thing that I can be certain of. I am going to walk out of my house and be with him. I am going to tell Charlie everything he needs to hear, and then I'm going to take his hand. And this time, I'm not going to let go. It's likely I may never be able to, and I'm okay with that. At least Charlie will no longer be alone.